She was the Empire's most radiant jewel yet. In her father's cold gaze, she could never eclipse her brother. Her birth cost her mother's life. Blaming her for every misfortune, the Emperor denied the girl even a single drop of fatherly affection. Lessons in submission started early. She was always forced to yield to her brother, to the young princess. That boy was just a useless fool who failed at everything. And yet, no matter how perfectly she excelled, her father refused to acknowledge her existence. He poured his entire heart into his mediocre son, leaving his daughter in the freezing shadows. Consumed by a blinding jealousy, the girl's desperate hunger for family warped into a jagged hatred unleashed upon her brother, with escalating cruelty. Like a child denied a treat, she naively thought acting out would win his attention. But the harsh truth, an unloved child has no right to be willful. Her rebellion only earned her brutal punishments. Thus, the little princess withered away, trapped in her brother's overbearing shadow. Starved of affection, the natural kindness within her heart began to rot day by agonizing day. Crushed by neglect, her disdain for her brother curdled into a lethal obsession. She began to crave his absolute demise. The princess convinced herself that if her rival simply vanished, her father's heart might finally open for her. But reality was a cruel master. Even after slaughtering her useless brother, she remained a ghost in her father's eyes. That was the moment she snapped. Despair swallowed her whole. She stopped begging for a love that never existed. Instead, she dragged her father down to hell, ending his life right alongside her brother's in a bloody massacre. The innocent girl was gone forever. In her place, a tyrant rose, brutally crushing any official who dared to defy her. She foolishly believed this ruthless version of herself finally deserved affection, but she never imagined that the man she loved would choose death over her embrace. Meanwhile, the people's simmering rage brewed quietly in the Empire's dark corners. Ultimately, the Empress met the cold edge of the guillotine, ending her tragic, twisted reign in a final rebellion. Yet death was just the beginning. Before she could even process the end, the princess opened her eyes to a new life. Reincarnation was a hard pill to swallow at first, but armed with the memories of her past failure, she swore to choose kindness this time. Let someone else be the villain. She was done with that midnight guilt. And that suffocating powerlessness. Peace was her only goal, but she never expected her brother, her greatest enemy, to be a total siscon, or that her father wasn't actually the monster she remembered. In her first life, she was sure he hated her, intentionally stealing every scrap of their father's attention. She had ripped his heart out without hesitation, yet even in his dying moments, he had whispered words of comfort, just to stop her tears. Back then, the princess viewed him as a clumsy idiot who couldn't achieve anything, except pestering her to play. He just grinned like a fool, even when her face was screaming with annoyance. He seemed utterly oblivious, refusing to be pushed away, more clingy and annoying than a stubborn sticker. She couldn't even count the times she'd tormented him, yet he never once held a grudge against her. When her bullying got too intense, he'd go cry in secret, but after drying his tears, he was back to being her loyal shadow. He treated her like his entire world, but back then, the princess was too blinded by toxic jealousy to see it. She viewed his affection as a sick way of gloating, fed by her father's constant favoritism toward the boy. Seeds of malice took root in her soul. Eventually, the siblings meant to be inseparable were forced to cross blades. Yet even facing death, her brother couldn't bring himself to harm a single hair on her head. He actually embraced the cold steel piercing his chest, but for him that physical agony was nothing compared to the torture of seeing her cry. Taking all the blame, the young prince gently stroked her cheek. Just like when they were kids, he forced a smile. "Don't cry, it ruins your beautiful face." But before his final words could land, his life slipped away, leaving him in an eternal slumber. Haunted by those crimson, tragic memories, the princess felt the weight of her past sins. She let out a helpless sigh. Suddenly, two arms wrapped around her neck as her brother planted a sweet kiss on her cheek. He was practically slurping on her like jelly. This shameless affection made her cringe. Seriously, showing mercy to the enemy is a mistake. Despite her annoyance, she didn't shove him away with the same hatred as before. Still, her icy vibe left the siscon prince feeling totally rejected. He never imagined he'd one day have to battle a literal book for her attention. But just then, the princess's nanny burst into the room. After warning the crown prince to let his sister study, the nanny turned around and froze. She found the girl engrossed in Ubera's complex history, a book far beyond a child's comprehension. Yet the princess wasn't just skimming. She was citing specific dates for every major historical event. The nanny stood paralyzed, completely stunned by the little girl's sheer, undeniable genius. She rushed to report this brilliance to the emperor, but the princess stopped her with desperation. Reborn with her memories, she wanted zero interaction with that absolute trash of a father. But fate was cruel, and they crossed paths in the garden after 8 years of neglect. He immediately tried to make her life a living hell, unaware his daughter had changed. This reborn princess was no longer the desperate little girl begging for a scrap of affection. She met his cold, hostile words with total silence, choosing to ignore his presence entirely. In her past life, she would have burst into tears or begged for a single compliment. But those feelings were long dead. Now her only goal was to escape his toxic side. The Emperor refused to let her go, barking at her for her supposed lack of respect. Used to his insults, she simply let out a weary sigh of pure, exhausted despair. She executed a perfect, graceful curtsy, leaving the Emperor rattled by her uncanny composure. Her flawless performance was impressive, but it wasn't enough to change his frozen heart. Suddenly, the maid claimed the princess could recite the entire 1,000-year history of the empire. The Emperor's eyes narrowed with intense scrutiny as he stared down his young daughter. Not even the most legendary scholars would dare to make such a bold, arrogant claim. He was convinced it was a cheap trick and wanted to expose her lies immediately. The arrogant ruler demanded a recitation, but the girl did something unexpected. She started negotiating. Honestly, she had zero interest in flexing her knowledge in front of her garbage father. Her previous life taught her that trying to impress him was just a cruel, meaningless joke. Back then, she mastered the sword just to please him, never once living for herself. She proposed a high-stakes bet, a reward if she succeeded, or a punishment if she failed. It was the first time anyone had ever dared to act so brazenly in his presence. The Emperor's face darkened instantly, but he assumed the girl was just pulling a massive bluff. He agreed to the terms, relishing the thought of publicly humiliating his dishonest daughter. Then came the shocker. She didn't just recite the lineage, she analyzed every historical turning point. She broke down complex events with the precision of a seasoned historian, leaving everyone breathless. A spark of pride flickered in the Emperor's eyes, quickly replaced by a cold, disgusted scowl. No matter how brilliant, her lack of spiritual power remained a permanent stain on the crown. To him, she was still the culprit who killed his wife, and his resentment blazed anew. He had no idea he would spend the rest of his life regretting his actions today. When the crown prince arrived to find her, the princess decided to make a silent exit. She was done chasing family love, especially while her brother came to flex his powers. He wanted to show off his new spiritual abilities, but the light spirits triggered her trauma. Watching the light dance, she was pulled back into a vortex of agonizing past memories. In her past life, failing to summon spirits led the Emperor to hide her in shame. While her brother went to school, rumors of her worthlessness spread through the empire like wildfire. After years of heartbreak, she had eventually snapped and tried to seize power by force. She fought for authority just to prove to her father that she actually had value. She just wanted to be loved like her brother, but it all ended in total defeat. Letting out a heavy breath, she shook her head to clear those dark, lingering shadows. Just as she tried to slip through the side gate, she slammed right into someone unexpected. He slammed down hard, seemingly immune to the pain. That dark-haired youth was the man she'd loved and lost in her previous life. Suddenly, the princess's eyes brimmed with tears. Beyond the joy of reunion was crushing guilt. She'd been so toxic then, knowing Tian loved another. Yet she'd forced their marriage naively, believing her desperate devotion could earn her his heart. She hadn't realized her obsession only fueled his loathing. Back then, she was just a delusional clown. She stubbornly hoped that without his mistress, Tian would choose her. She never imagined he'd prefer death. That grim realization sent heavy tears streaming down the young girl's cheeks. Like a repentant child, she sobbed apologies to a bewildered Tian who feared he'd injured her. He gently offered his handkerchief, stunned that the princess wasn't scolding him for the fall. Instead, she choked out how much she'd missed him, a bizarre confession that left Tian floored. He realized he'd never seen a girl so breathtaking, but the peaceful moment shattered instantly. The crown prince lunged forward. Seeing his sister's tears, he delivered a savage punch to his friend. Dorothy froze. She never suspected her supposedly weak brother possessed such an explosive temper. As the prince geared up for round 2, Dorothy rushed to kill the drama. She frantically lied about sand in her eye, even though her sprained ankle was throbbing in agony. To ease his worry, she forced a brave smile. Such selfless grace made it impossible not to adore her, especially given her royal status. Softening, Tian flashed the little princess a gentle, heartwarming smile, and lightly kissed her hand. In that heartbeat, the mountain of past life hatred seemed to vanish. Dorothy let herself believe this was heaven's grace, a golden ticket to rewrite her tragic fate. She yearned to bridge their destiny, but a sugary, sweet voice suddenly sliced through her daydream. Like ice water drenching her soul, Dorothy's fantasies evaporated as she slowly lifted her gaze. There she was, the face she loathed most. Julia's radiant innocence was a brutal contrast to Dorothy's darkness. It was no mystery why Tian clung to her. Dorothy felt like a total pathetic fool. She'd branded Julia a homewrecker, never realizing that she was the actual intruder in their story. Now the little princess could only watch from the sidelines, as the trio stood in perfect harmony. That kind of joy was a club she'd never join. Even in this life, they were soulmates. Their radiant smiles were like daggers. She'd foolishly hoped that simply being good would bring happiness. But reality hit hard. Happiness wasn't meant for her. She was completely disconnected from their world. Feeling like a pathetic circus act, Dorothy couldn't take it anymore and fled in utter humiliation. The throbbing in her ankle was nothing compared to the agonizing heartbreak within her chest. Battered and broken, the girl retreated to her chambers, curling up where the sunlight couldn't reach. Only the shadows offered her any solace. It wasn't that she refused to move on. She just couldn't grasp why she was always the one bleeding when the dream shattered. She donned her mask of calm, burying her nose in books to shield her heart from the world. But the peace didn't last. Days later, her father would deliver a soul-crushing public humiliation. It was the day of the Crown Prince's official coronation, a massive milestone for her brother. Dorothy tried to skip the event, but as a member of the bloodline, her presence was mandatory. Unable to resist her brother's endless begging, the little princess finally dragged herself to the hall. The grand hall was packed with elite guests. Even amidst the ritual, her brother flashed a doting grin. Standing below, Dorothy rolled her eyes, feeling genuinely worried about the future of the empire. But honestly, those high-level politics weren't things she should be worrying about anymore. She just wanted to play the neglected princess and fade away. Then the emperor appeared. He beamed with immense pride while crowning his son, a look that stung Dorothy's heart. She couldn't help but wonder, what kind of face did her father make when looking at her? Usually it was pure coldness and disgust. Realizing she was just a redundant background extra, she sighed. She stood like a ghost outside the spotlight. Every cheer, every compliment was for her brother. Watching from the shadows, she felt invisible. Even though she expected this, the young princess's heart shattered. Her brother caught her eye and winked, sensing her gloom. But the princess quickly turned away. She couldn't face him. If she looked, her jealousy might leak out and expose her ugly side. Trying to vanish, she spun around only to collide with a high-ranking minister heading her way. Red wine splashed across her dress, soaking the fabric. She stood frozen, paralyzed by the sudden mess. Suddenly, a cold, booming voice cut through the air. It was her father, the emperor himself. Instead of protecting her, he snapped. He demanded she apologize to the man immediately. To him, she was worth less than a common official. The injustice burned deep in her soul. Swallowing her pride, she bowed. Dignity meant nothing now. Everyone already knew she was the unloved child. Before the entire court, the empire's princess groveled to a minister. It was the ultimate humiliation. She felt branded by shame, but when she glanced up, she met two sets of eyes. Tian and Julia were staring back, faces full of pity. Was the whole world mocking her? The noise of the party died out. All she wanted was a hole to crawl into. She couldn't let her crush see her like this, so broken and pathetic. She had to get out. She had tried so hard to be perfect. Why did fate keep crushing her spirits like this? Running back to her room, she collapsed, sobbing silently. Her small, trembling frame was a tragic sight. A knock at the door startled her. It was her brother calling out with fake concern. To her, his voice was like sandpaper. Why did everyone have to look down on her? Was it because she was a failure now? She just wanted peace, but even that was denied. Snapping, she yanked the door open to scream at him, but she froze instantly. Standing there was her beloved Tian. Why was the universe so determined to ruin her? First the wine, now this. He was seeing her at her absolute worst, messy, angry, and unhinged. Was she being punished for wanting love? Was even a shred of redemption off the table? Terrified, she fled again, slamming her chamber doors shut. She sank to the floor, completely drained. Her family was gone. She had tried to lie to herself, but the truth was finally out. And now she had lost Tian too. She had absolutely nothing left in this cold palace. The reality sank in. She and Tian were over. Soon after, a brutal fever took hold. She lay pale and shivering with only a single maid to watch over her fading life. Did her father want her dead? Did her brother finally despise her? Her thoughts turned dark. But then the crown prince appeared. He was the last person she expected to see. He lingered by the door, looking guilty. He only stepped inside once she called him out. He held a basket of fresh dew-covered tomatoes. This was his clumsy way of saying sorry. The guilt of the coronation ceremony weighed on him. He hated that he'd caused her tears. Miraculously, she didn't push him away. Seeing an opening, he suggested they leave the palace grounds. These walls were suffocating her heart. He knew she needed fresh air to truly heal up. He couldn't stand seeing his sister wither away. He tried every trick in the book to convince her. He followed her like a sad puppy, pleading with big eyes and a soft, persistent voice. He even hid tiny invitation notes inside her favorite books. He was pulling out all the stops. Finally, she relented. She'd go, but only if her annoying brother stayed behind this time. He felt a sting of rejection, but mostly relief. Her happiness was worth the small sacrifice. With her maid's help, she donned her most exquisite dress. She looked like a precious porcelain doll. Sweet, charming, and delicate, she was ready. They headed straight for the empire's most vibrant district. This was her first time tasting freedom since her rebirth. The bustling streets felt like a dream. The lively market was overwhelming. She had walked these same paths in her tragic past life. Yet all she witnessed was ruin, a living hell on earth forged by her own tyrannical hands. Without her iron grip, the world outside thrived in peace. A bitter, tangled knot of emotions tightened in the princess's chest. Suddenly, her maid's hand grasped hers. That simple warmth began to soothe the cold anxiety gnawing at her soul. Perhaps it was time to embrace this tranquility. Even if love was out of reach, this was the price for her past sins. But the little princess forgot one thing. The more perfect the surface, the deeper the shadows lurking beneath. Dressed in finery, she was the perfect prey. In a heartbeat, she was snatched away from a deserted corner. Cruel hands struck from the dark. The maid crumbled under a heavy blow as the princess collapsed in terror. Drugged and helpless, she slipped into darkness. When her eyes finally flickered open, 3 days had vanished. Agony pulsed through every limb. Dehydration had stripped her of all strength, just as her captors intended. They'd sent her maid back to demand a ransom. Yet 72 hours later, there was only deafening silence. With no payoff, they were ready to end her life. At first, she held on to a naive shred of hope. She believed that despite his hatred, her father wouldn't let her rot in this hellhole. But as the hours bled into days, the brutal truth dawned on her. Her life meant absolutely nothing to him. Nor did her death. The maid had returned days ago, yet the palace remained chillingly indifferent. It was pathetic. Moments ago, she was still dreaming of her father racing to her rescue. Reality cut deeper than any blade. If her brother were the one missing, the world would be upside down. He'd be frantic with worry for his son. Instead, he was likely celebrating that his useless daughter was gone. Abandoned and unloved, she was truly alone. Her heart shook with fear, but there was no one left to call. She cursed her own stupidity. After 4 days of starvation, she was at her absolute breaking point. How could a frail child take on 2 monsters? It was time for the princess to get clever. A lethal gamble was her only choice. She put on the mask of a spoiled, helpless little rich girl. Her innocent act was flawless. Those thugs didn't suspect a thing as they lowered their guard instantly. Finally free from her bonds, she massaged her bruised wrists while weaving a web of honeyed lies. She'd play their game and stroke their egos. Just a little more time and she'd vanish into the night. But time was running out. Without a ransom check in sight, the kidnappers were starting to lose their cool. The abuse escalated daily. Their frustration turned into brutal kicks and strikes against her small frame. She wouldn't survive another week, but then fate threw her a desperate lifeline. As the thugs plotted her end, a massive scorpion slithered through the cracks of their hideout. The creature crept in its obsidian stinger, glinting with a lethal, terrifying shimmer in the dark. The terrifying criminals suddenly turned into cowards. For the princess, this was the ultimate opening. Though her skin crawled with terror, she knew she had to seize this moment or die. She struck a deal with the devils. If she handled the venomous beast, they'd set her free. But freedom was an illusion. Beyond those walls lay an ocean of sand that no child could cross. The scorching dunes were a natural prison. No wonder they weren't worried about her running away. Panic flared in her chest, but she ruthlessly crushed it. She had to stay icy calm. The desert was a death sentence. Her only hope now was a rescue mission that seemed less likely by the hour. Creeping toward the window, she overheard a chilling conversation. They were planning her execution. Blood turned to ice in her veins. The weight of their betrayal felt like a freezing void. Had her father even noticed she was gone? To him, she was clearly just trash to be discarded. He knew they'd kill her. But why would he care? An unloved princess is worth less than dirt. She was a political zero with no magical talent, a total disappointment in the eyes of the throne. She let out a hollow, bitter laugh. She actually thought laying low would buy her a peaceful life. How naive she'd been. Her fingers tightened around the hilt of a stolen blade. Submission wasn't kindness, it was cowardice. And she was done being a victim. No more excuses. It was time to awaken the legend. In her past life, she was the ultimate swordmaster. The Empire's ultimate weapon. In her past, her blade ended her family. Now this tiny princess faced a new nightmare. She needed raw power to crush these 2 foes. The girl's strikes were lethal, precise, and lightning fast. One clean slash tore through his shoulder, drawing crimson. But she hesitated to finish them. In a death match, that mercy is a fatal mistake. Suddenly, a massive hand clamped around the little princess's throat like a vice. Her attacker squeezed his grip, tightening until her vision blurred. She could feel her very soul slipping away into the void. Then came his cruel, mocking laughter. "Struggle all you want, kid, but it's over. You're nothing." His insults cut deep, echoing her tragic past. Back then, she fought hard but was always shadowed by her brother. Denied her dreams and ignored by her father, she lived and died without ever knowing a parent's warmth. Love was a luxury she never expected. She just wanted to survive. Just that. How pathetic. Then something snapped. The fragile princess shattered. She lunged forward, breaking his grip with explosive force. Pure, unadulterated hatred fueled her next moves. She rained down a barrage of strikes on her captor. In that moment, she looked like a demon from hell. This was the wrath of a fallen royal. Paralyzed by pure terror, the kidnapper could only stare in absolute horror. He braced for the killing blow, but it never came. The princess simply turned away, her small body trembling with exhaustion. "Don't push me again. I just want a quiet life," she whispered. With those haunting words, She dragged her battered body into the endless wasteland. Gritty sand lashed against her skin like tiny needles. The pain was nothing compared to the numbness in her soul. She walked home, though she had no reason to return. No one was waiting for her. Her brother had Dad's love. Julia had Theon, but she was completely alone. Where did she go wrong? If she were a son or possessed spirit, magic would her father finally look at her. It was all a cruel mirage, a fleeting dream lost in the desert's shifting sands. Endless despair swallowed her whole as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into darkness. The freezing wind sliced through her like daggers. Shivering, she hugged herself, trying to find warmth that wasn't there. Then she collapsed. She was just so done. Maybe dying here wouldn't be so bad after all. No more mocking glares from Dad. Her brother would probably celebrate being rid of his annoying sister. It was finally over. The little princess closed her eyes, ready to embrace the eternal silence of the dunes. Staring at the glittering stars above, she accepted her end. This peaceful goodbye didn't feel so scary anymore. Just as her light faded, mysterious flickers appeared in the distance. Orbs of light began to pierce the gloom. The radiance was blinding, as if the desert itself was catching fire. A spark of hope flickered within her. It probably wasn't her father's army, but she had to try. One last gamble for survival. She stumbled to her feet, waving her arms frantically. She tripped and fell, but she kept crawling forward. Her sheer will was rewarded. The figures approaching through the sand were no hallucination. It was them. The Emperor's elite guard had arrived. The lead knight's heart dropped the moment he recognized her tiny, broken face. Seeing them, the princess finally let go. Her strength vanished, and she slumped onto the burning sand. A small part of her felt relieved. Maybe Dad hadn't abandoned her, but that sweet delusion wouldn't last long. Days later, the wounded princess drifted back to consciousness. Through a haze, she spotted a very familiar silhouette. Peeking through the door, she heard her father's voice. He was here. Did he actually care about her? Her resentment melted into tears of pure joy. The agony in her limbs didn't even matter anymore. Feverish and dizzy, she just wanted to throw herself into his arms. But her heart stopped at his next words. She froze. Her father sounded disgusted, ranting about how she was a total embarrassment to the throne. He called her a nuisance, a brat who only caused trouble. It turned out the royal image mattered more than his own daughter's life. Even if she was perfect, he'd never love her. How tragic. She was so delusional to think he came for her. What a joke. The little princess felt her heart shatter. She crawled back into bed, hiding under the covers. Over and over, she whispered a dark mantra, convincing herself this suffering was just karmic debt for her past sins. It was the only way to survive. 2 weeks passed in a blink. Despite the doctor's efforts, the princess's health continued to spiral downward. The physicians were baffled and helpless. Only she knew the truth. Her heart had simply given up on living. Ever since father's rage exploded, he never visited again, and every single one of her maids was replaced. Her only nanny was ruthlessly fired, leaving the young princess in a state of absolute chilling isolation. Fortunately, the doctor suggested a seaside villa for her recovery, hoping the salt air would heal her. The coast was better for health, though the living conditions were far less grand than the imperial palace. Everyone expected her to refuse, but surprisingly, the little princess agreed to the move without a second thought. She was desperate to escape this toxic place. To hell with that trashy crown prince and his drama. No longer craving father's love or the attention of Theon and Julia, she just wanted a distant sanctuary. Her goal was to cultivate her own power and live safely, instead of being a pawn for others. During this dark time, the young princess finally realized a brutal truth about her reality. True kindness is a luxury. One must possess absolute power as a prerequisite to making real choices. With iron determination, the little princess prepared to depart for her treatment by the ocean. She assumed they would be glad to see her go, yet her brother and Theon seemed strangely devastated. As news of her departure spread, her brother came sprinting to her palace chambers in a frantic panic. The young prince gazed at her with a face full of regret, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Like a rejected puppy, he begged her to stay, reminding her of their promise to attend the academy. But she cut him off with icy coldness, burying the naive fantasies she once held in her past. She knew father would never allow a magicless failure to embarrass the royal family at such a school. He would never permit the family's greatest stain to be seen or judged by the high-ranking nobility. House arrest was the only mercy he offered. Even after rebirth, nothing truly changed in this cold palace. The seaside was her only escape, out of sight, out of mind, and away from their judgment. The crown prince tried to speak, but the princess dismissed him with a soul-piercing frozen stare. He retreated in total despair. 3 days later, the girl had her bags packed and was ready to leave. Theon was her only lingering worry, but the thought of him with Julia made her heart ache again. A sharp, uncontrollable pain bloomed in her chest, reminding her of the love that always ended in tears. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out. Was it Theon? Had he actually come to say his final goodbye? Her heart hammered with sudden excitement, but she quickly masked it, fearing the pain of facing him. He was surrounded by companions while she stood alone, yet Tion rushed to reach her side. The young man's eyes were drowning in sorrow as he stood before the princess one last time. He pulled a handful of colorful candies from his pocket, a small gift for her long carriage ride. Her face flushed like a ripe apple as she accepted the sweets, listening to his trembling, sad voice. He pleaded for her not to go, throwing her guarded emotions into a whirlwind of absolute chaos. Was there a chance to win him back? She instantly crushed that delusion, knowing it was unrealistic. Better to leave now. Wasn't being hated in her previous life enough of a lesson for her? The princess turned away and vanished into the carriage, leaving Tion standing frozen and alone. His fists clenched tight. He had fallen for her, but this budding love was over before it began. He whispered a plea for her return, but the little princess was already beyond the reach of his words. Seated in the galloping carriage, she felt a profound sadness as she left her first love behind. Clutching the candies to her chest, she prepared to say a final, permanent goodbye to her tragic past. A vibrant new life awaited her. Finally, her world was beginning to regain its true, brilliant colors. The seaside air was incredibly fresh, and she could finally feel the sweet taste of absolute freedom. Suddenly, a soft female voice spoke from behind it. Was the new servant assigned by the emperor. The maid likely didn't know she was serving a disgraced princess, or she would have quit already. Just then, a tall man approached alongside the maid, catching the princess's eye immediately. A familiar face caused her heart to stop. Her pulse quickened as she recognized the mysterious newcomer. This man was the vice captain of the knights, the very man she had killed in her past life. She vaguely recalled the peak of her power as the empire's ultimate empress. Her blade was unrivaled back then, yet that man chose death over serving her. She ended him with one strike. But fate loves playing twisted games with us. Now at her lowest, that same arrogant man has become her only loyal subordinate. The tiny princess felt pity. Sticking with her meant he'd never rise in rank. Almost possessed, the little girl reached out her hand for a polite, noble greeting. She waited, but the knight just stood there, giving her absolutely zero response. The princess grumbled internally. This guy was just as insufferable as in her past. She should have saved her pity for a dog, but then he dramatically high-fived her. Finally, she wasn't alone. Back at her isolated palace, the girl sat down. After deep thought, she finally began drafting a special list of kindness on paper. To conquer this new life, she needed a fresh set of noble, selfless goals. What does it actually mean to be kind? The question left the princess totally stumped. Luckily, a maid arrived with snacks, so she asked her about this troubling dilemma. But oops, her secret list was accidentally revealed right under the maid's nose. The maid couldn't help but giggle. Setting kindness as a goal seemed pretty childish. She didn't realize those words were the princess's whole reason for existing. Try smiling more. Kind souls are always cheerful, the maid suggested. That advice made the princess freeze up. Her brother was always so bright and bubbly. No wonder everyone worshipped him. Meanwhile, she was always ice cold. No wonder she was hated. She searched for happy memories. She forced her lips upward, and suddenly a faint, delicate smile bloomed on her face. The maid gasped. The princess was stunning, but then her face started twitching like crazy. Her face literally cramped from lack of use. Embarrassed, she immediately kicked everyone out. She went back to perfecting her kindness list, struggling with every single word she wrote. First, atonement. She had to pay for her past sins. Don't covet what isn't yours. Father belongs to brother. The mistress belongs to Julia. I have nothing as it should be. Second, save 1,000,000 lives. 500,000 perished in her previous life's bloody war. I must atone. Third, 3 good deeds monthly. Donate 10 million to the starving poor. They were once my subjects. Lastly, smile more. Learn from that annoying brother of mine. Even if I hate him, he's still way more popular than me. Her pen finally stopped. Tears blurred her vision. Maybe this won't change anything, but she still wanted to face the sun. After finishing her melancholy list, the princess headed out for a lonely walk by the sea. Gentle waves kissed her ankles while the quiet night wrapped around her like a cloak. She wished this moment could last forever. But suddenly, she spotted a small boy sobbing nearby. That distinct white hair looked strangely familiar. As she got closer, the shocking truth hit her. It was the man she'd ordered to be executed. Now he looked like a fragile, weeping doll. Who'd guess he'd become a lethal minister? Dangerous as opium, he was the serpent that tempted Eve. Step by step, he'd lured her down a dark path to murder her father and brother. Blinded by rage, she fell into the abyss. Yet he used his silver tongue to escape guilt. Talk about irony. One day he was kissing her hand like a perfect, loyal gentleman. The next he sent her straight to the guillotine. But looking at this fragile child, she couldn't bring herself to hate him. He wasn't that cunning snake she once knew. If Eisen hadn't committed those atrocities before, maybe he deserves a fresh start too. She quietly added a new goal: save young Eisen. She forced a bright smile onto her face. But as she approached, the boy bolted. He looked just like a terrified little white rabbit. Before the tiny princess could even protest, he vanished. The defeated little Dorothy lost all motivation to even move. Yet on her lonely trek back, that boy's sobbing face haunted her thoughts. Soon she sat poised, on the sofa, surrounded by high society ladies, practically beaming with maternal affection. Little Dorothy was the definition of perfection. At just 8, she acted like a mini adult. She paired an impossibly cute look with a calm, refined soul. Pure aesthetic, perfection. Sweet yet solemn, she was a living angel. Honestly, without her royal title, these nobles would have fought to adopt her instantly. So hearing that our delicate princess was stuck inside, these aunties felt their hearts break. They were ready to brew medicine themselves. But Dorothy just let out a heavy sigh. This vibe was totally off. It felt like a dozen brothers nagging her, yet her royal training demanded flawless poise. Suddenly, a soft-spoken woman caught her eye. This lady appeared to be Aizen's mom. With a warm smile, she invited her over. Dorothy accepted instantly. Truthfully, Aizen was on her mind. She remembered him as the neglected, illegitimate heir, shunned by the Burlingtons. His father viewed him as a disgrace, only loving his pure-blood son. In a way, they were kindred spirits, both unwanted children living in cold shadows. She wanted to rescue that boy, preventing him from spiraling into the villain he was in her past life. Thus, she headed to the Aizen estate the next day. She was met by that minister, the one who'd humiliated her with spilled wine. Ignoring that trauma, she demanded to see the young master. The man's eyes lit up with greed, assuming his perfect heir had charmed the princess. Big mistake, though. The heir was away at the Empire's top academy, but Dorothy dropped a bombshell. She was actually there for Aizen. The Duke's face turned instantly sour and awkward. Inside, Dorothy smirked. This man had clearly erased his youngest son from his mind, neglected just like his father's frozen heart. After a quick whisper to his wife, he lied, claiming Aizen was too ill to greet her. Clearly, these two assumed she had a crush. Perfect. That gave her the ultimate excuse to keep visiting. Under their watch, she finally faced the man who orchestrated her death in her past life. Kid Aizen was low-key adorable, looking as innocent and fragile as a little white bunny. But Dorothy knew it was all a front. Aizen was hiding a secret from the world. He had a subtle frown whenever he lied. Every sweet word he'd spoken was total cap. He was just using her to escape that mansion. Dorothy stared intensely at his brow, looking for that tell. Her gaze was so piercing that the boy touched his face nervously. "Is there something on me?" Dorothy froze. She couldn't exactly call him out yet. Panicking for an excuse, she finally decided to break the tension by coolly stating he simply looked too beautiful. The second she said it, she wanted to die of pure embarrassment. Why was that so cringe? She literally wanted the ground to swallow her whole. But before her own face could heat up, the pretty boy beat her to it. He turned into a blushing mess covering his face. His shocked reaction made him look like an innocent victim. Past life Aizen would have been way too shameless to act this way. Was she being too judgmental? Suddenly, before she could blink, the boy leaned in close, catching her completely off guard. A soft kiss landed on her cheek. Aizen looked incredibly focused, but sadly, she couldn't see his face. She turned redder than a ripe apple, even her ears flushed. Her cheeks flared a gorgeous crimson. What was he thinking? How could he just steal a kiss without saying a single word? Captivated by the boy's pure radiance, the little princess swallowed her sharp words. Realizing she was a total sucker for sweet talk, her resolve only grew stronger. She was going to fix Aizen. If they chose kindness, maybe they could finally snag a happy ending. As the days blurred together, the princess and Aizen slowly vibe-checked each other. Let's be real, a cute boy who knows how to be precious is absolute top-tier charm. Slowly, the trauma from Tion faded away. She didn't even care about his letters anymore. This unbothered life was a whole mood. No toxic people, just pure, bright energy. Time flew and her 9th birthday arrived. Usually, this was her loneliest day of the year. But this time, she wasn't alone. She headed to the dining hall early, same as always. She never expected anyone to care. But the moment she stepped inside, she was absolutely floored. A feast fit for a queen covered the entire table, a full-blown birthday celebration. Suddenly, a sparkler burst above her head. Happy birthday! Her eyes welled up instantly. Beyond her trash family, people actually remembered her special day. The maid then suggested a beach stroll, even though the sky looked pretty sketchy and gray. Seeing those literal puppy dog eyes, the princess couldn't say no. The duo made their way down to the shoreline, just outside the villa. Our smart girl already clocked it. There was definitely some surprise waiting by the waves. Boom! A massive shell sat on the sand. The princess couldn't help but sigh. They were treating her like a toddler again, but honestly, being spoiled felt kinda amazing. She started hunting for more shells but found nothing. Her face fell as she looked up. Wait, another shell, then another. She followed the trail until her arms were completely loaded. But when she turned around, the maid had vanished. The empty shore was eerie and silent. Suddenly, a blurry shape emerged from the ocean. Based on that height, it had to be Sir Stephen. As the figure got closer, she blinked in shock. It was a giant toy lion from a fairy tale. It let out a totally forced roar, making her lips quiver with suppressed emotion. Hello, I am Leo, the bravest lion warrior. The voice was hilarious and totally disguised. It clicked he was the hero from the picture books she used to obsess over. But she'd long since traded fairy tales for much darker, more serious reads. The maid had actually remembered those tiny details. This was one massive, wholesome misunderstanding. Looking at those big, innocent lion eyes, she just couldn't bring herself to ruin the moment. She couldn't crush their sincere effort. It was time to lock in and play along. She needed to match his energy. But how does a 9-year-old girl act surprised? After a brief internal struggle, she looked up with wide eyes. Did you come just for my birthday? The massive lion knelt before her, placing warm, steady hands on her small shoulders. Happy birthday, Princess Dorothy Rar. Even the princess felt a bit of secondhand embarrassment, hearing that her vision blurred as hot tears began to spill over. Everyone was grinding so hard to protect her sensitive heart. She couldn't go back to being self-destructive. In that moment, life finally had a purpose. She had people worth protecting now. The girl who loved all the wrong people finally found her true lion knight. The guy in the costume was goofy as heck, but his clumsy heart was purely golden. Doing something this childish was way below a knight's pay grade, yet he gave it 100%. He went all in on the brave lion role. From day one, he knew she was way too mature. At an age meant for play, her smiles always felt like they carried the weight of the world. Despite her cute act, she was drowning in stress. So when the maid asked him to play the lion, he didn't hesitate. He just wanted to see her genuinely happy and protect that smile forever. Such a pure soul. As the sky bled into a deep ink, Stephen scooped the tiny princess into his arms. His hold was steady and safe. Without uttering a single word, he projected a sense of peace. It was surreal. During the journey, she spiraled into memories of why she took Stephen's life before. Was it his stubborn pride, or was she jealous that her brother had a knight loyal unto death? But that past was dead. Her heart now held a special spark for her lion-hearted protector. Transfixed, she whispered. You were once a man of incredible courage, and handsome too. Those sudden words made Stephen freeze, leaving the little princess in a panic. She fumbled for an excuse, but Stephen just chuckled with a mischievous glint in his eye. I'm no man, I'm a lion, he roared. She couldn't help it. Her laughter rang out. He was dorky, but he gave his all for her smile. Shouldn't she do the same? Suddenly, a massive bolt of lightning tore the sky. Torrential rain slammed down, but the lion knight didn't flinch. He shielded her instantly. The heavy toy costume became a soggy mess under the downpour, yet he kept her perfectly dry. He sprinted toward the villa, reaching the gates in record time. Setting her down, Stephen vanished back into the storm despite being drenched to the bone. He refused to remove the costume. He wouldn't let the lion warrior fantasy die for her. Watching his retreating figure, the girl breathed a soft "thank you for everything." His devotion was unmatched. It was easily the most magical day they had ever shared. Later, safe in her room, she changed into dry clothes and spotted a letter resting on her desk. Her brother's name on the envelope killed her mood instantly. She already knew the vibe. Another flex about his fancy school life. For a girl trapped at home, it was just low-key annoying. She tossed the letter aside without a second thought, completely unfazed. She worried if Stephen had returned safely, but then she caught two figures whispering in the hall. Realizing they had planned the birthday surprise together, she decided to keep up the act. Playing the part, she gushed about meeting the lion warrior by the sea. They were stoked. They beamed with relief, and she couldn't help but let a genuine smirk tug at her lips. When she asked about a gift, he shot the maid a desperate, helpless look for backup. She leaned into the chaos, pretending to be heartbroken that Stephen hadn't brought a present. She held back her laughter as Stephen started sweating. The poor guy was totally losing it. He was fumbling his words. Taking pity, she shifted gears and dropped a major request. She wanted to master the blade. She was a prodigy in her past life, but now, she needed that strength back. She wouldn't let the abyss swallow her whole a second time. This time, she'd wield the sword for her loved ones, inspired by Stephen's unwavering protection. True power isn't in the steel, but the soul. She had to be both compassionate and fierce. 3 years flew by. During that time, she trained tirelessly under Stephen's expert guidance. Her skills evolved at a terrifying pace. Even her father frequently visited the training grounds to watch her grow. Life was pure bliss until a deadly plague struck the detached palace. As mass panic set in, the little princess didn't waver. She stepped up with iron resolve. She chose to lead from the front lines, staying by her people's side through the darkness. While the cowards fled, she used her entire fortune to battle the spreading sickness. She dispatched Stephen to recruit top-tier doctors. With her gold, the recovery plan finally took flight. She personally visited the sick, offering them hope. Under her brilliant command, the tide turned. The unstoppable plague began to fade. Soon the city's vibrant heartbeat returned to its streets. Her soul felt at peace. She had truly fallen in love with this land and its people. This was her new beginning. But a shocking twist was about to flip her world upside down. Her relentless grind finally paid off. The citizens were officially standing their hardworking princess. They showered her with humble gifts. Those potatoes weren't diamonds, but they were pure gold. Kindness hit different. Overwhelmed with this new joy, our tiny princess took immediate action. She ordered a potato feast for dinner, and even let Ison join the table. Meanwhile, the crown prince was totally lost. He was currently spiraling in deep frustration. His sister ghosted every single letter. For 3 years, he wrote daily, never missing a beat. Yet Dorothy gave him nothing. What exactly did he do to deserve this cold shoulder? Suddenly, Tion appeared behind him. He refused to believe Dorothy actually hated their guts. Her memory was etched in his soul. Recalling their promise, Tion suggested a surprise visit. The prince instantly deflated. He wanted to go, but the academy rules were strictly absolute. Tion countered, noting their long stay. Surely they could finally finesse the teachers for permission. The prince's eyes ignited. He practically jumped for joy, his whole body radiating pure hype. Next morning, the princess started her dawn sword drills, staying consistent with her brutal routine. Suddenly, a familiar presence behind her sent a massive chill down her spine. She lunged with her blade instantly, but it was just Ison looking totally flustered and red. He reached out gently, wiping the sweat from her forehead without a hint of hesitation. Dorothy recoiled, dying of embarrassment. She was drenched and definitely not looking like royalty. But Ison just grinned. "You smell amazing, princess, like fresh grass and sunshine," he whispered. Her face turned beet red. Even after 2 lifetimes, she was defenseless against his charms. He suddenly grabbed her hand. Dorothy panicked. Her palm was sweaty and grimy from practice. She tried to pull away, desperate to wash up before things got even more awkward. Instead of letting go, Ison pulled her in tighter, his gaze burning with pure devotion. Deep inside little Dorothy's soul, a strange and subtle shift began to stir. She couldn't fathom why her brother's constant affection still felt so incredibly distant and uncomfortable. Perhaps it was lingering jealousy or his total lack of understanding. They headed to her chambers. The modest decor was a far cry from royal standards, lacking any true palace grandeur. Ison stood frozen in shock, yet the little princess didn't even bother offering an explanation. In her previous life, she craved opulence, but after being reborn, everything had totally changed. She finally realized that golden treasures could never patch the hollow void in her heart. Stunning gowns only made her feel like a circus act. Wealth was better spent elsewhere. Suddenly, Ison produced a magnificent ruby pendant that shimmered with intense and costly brilliance. Dorothy declined it instantly. The light in the boy's eyes vanished into pure, crushing heartbreak. "Do you hate it?" he whimpered. His pathetic expression hit her with a wave of guilt. She stammered that the jewels were too grand and should go to someone truly significant. But her attempt at comfort backfired. Seeing Ison on the verge of tears was absolutely devastating. To escape the tension, she pivoted. This boy was surprisingly manipulative and way too sharp. One wrong move and she'd be trapped again. She politely claimed she had urgent business. Ison wasn't listening. His focus was locked onto the mountain of mail stacked on her desk. He questioned the letters, making the princess's eyes go cold and vacant as dark shadows. They were from her brother at school. Though kind, they only fueled her deep insecurities. She didn't want to hear about his royal struggles or his glittering life at the academy. Those stories only ripped open the scars of being a forgotten princess rotting in the countryside. Their destinies were drifting apart. She was the shadow, and they were the shining suns. As she prepared to leave, Ison's voice cut through the heavy silence once again. "What's this?" He pointed at a stack of men's handkerchiefs resting on her table. Panic flared. Her melancholy vanished, replaced by the sheer terror of being caught red-handed. She scrambled to hide them, but Ison had already spotted the name Theon stitched inside. So she had a secret crush. Ison realized he had to act much faster now. Meanwhile, the crown prince penned his usual letter to his sister, unaware of her coldness. Dorothy barely glanced at it before tossing it aside, distracted by a letter for Esteban. It was strange. A mere guard rarely received such formal and official-looking correspondence. Esteban's face turned grim as he read, sending a spike of anxiety through the princess. It was an invitation for a promotion exam. Her maid cheered, but Dorothy felt numb. A promotion meant Esteban would be reassigned to the capital, leaving her behind forever. This was his golden ticket to greatness. She should have been thrilled for his future. She forced a pained smile, her voice trembling as she offered her hollow congratulations. Her heart was screaming. She wanted him to stay, but she couldn't be that selfish. A knight of his caliber shouldn't waste his youth in this desolate backwater wasteland. She quietly asked for the details. The exam was coming up fast, far too fast. He had to leave within the week. There wasn't even time for a proper farewell. Dorothy lowered her head, whispering that she would be fine on her own without him. A man as talented as Esteban belonged in the spotlight. Her voice began to crack. Swallowing her royal pride, she begged him to stay just one more day. Just one. She wanted to throw him a party. Tears pooled in her eyes, threatening to fall. Suddenly, Esteban dropped to one knee and gently took her small hand in his. With a gaze full of warmth and loyalty, he promised he wasn't going anywhere. The tiny princess stood frozen, her vision blurred by a veil of tears. How could her lion knight be so oblivious to such a golden opportunity? There wouldn't be another shot yet. Stephen remained unshaken, calmly declaring that shielding her was his ultimate purpose. He was simply following his heart. Seeing that genuine smile, a sudden realization washed over the young princess. She finally understood why she hadn't prioritized her own life in the past. It was because back then, the one she desperately wanted to save was her brother. Even though she knew the king's path ended in ruin, she still gave everything to protect the one she loved. In that moment, she threw herself into the knight's embrace. Call her selfish or obsessed, it didn't matter. She refused to let Stephen slip through her fingers ever again. Later that day, she pulled her usual disappearing act from the palace, rocking a commoner's disguise to stay under the radar. With Stephen ditching his heavy armor, they looked like a pair of ordinary siblings wandering the bustling streets. Suddenly, a massive crowd gathered by the city walls caught her eye. She tried peeking through the sea of people, but she was just too small to see over the wall of bodies. Just as disappointment started to sink in, massive hands gently hoisted her up by the waist. Stephen lifted her high, making her feel as light as a feather. The view was perfect now. Turns out the city was hosting an amateur sword-fighting tournament. Her eyes lit up with pure hype. In her previous life, mastering the blade was her true passion, but she'd buried those dreams just to win her father's approval. In this life, though, she was finally playing by her own rules. She finally had a chance to live for herself, no matter what she was entering that arena. They headed straight for registration, but the official in charge just gave her a look of pure mockery. He laughed in her face, telling her to go home. He claimed this was no place for little girls to play house. His condescending tone immediately set her blood on fire. The audacity was off the charts. The rules clearly stated that age was just a number for entry, but instead of backing down, the man doubled down on his rudeness, insulting her upbringing and even her parents. Fury surged through her as she reached for her hilt, ready to humble this jerk. However, in a flash, Stephen's blade was already slammed into the table, the cold steel pressed against the man's nose. The official nearly fainted from pure terror. And just like that, her registration was settled. On her way out, she ran into Izan. He looked like a mistreated servant struggling under a mountain of baggage. The guy leading him kept trashing him for being too slow. It was a painful sight to behold. She recognized him instantly. That was Izan's older brother, the supposed golden child of the Duke's family. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed as Izan collapsed. Everything he was carrying shattered across the pavement. His tiny hands were sliced open and bleeding. But instead of helping, his brother delivered a brutal stinging slap. That was the final straw. The princess ordered Stephen to seize the arrogant brat immediately. She rushed to check on Izan. His cheek was swollen and his eyes were swimming with tears of pure resentment. Heartbreak and rage warred inside her. She'd heard rumors of his mistreatment, but seeing it was a different story. Looking at his pathetic state, she realized he was just a child. Meanwhile, the Duke's spoiled heir was throwing a fit. He screamed at her, demanding if she knew who he was. The princess just gave him a chilling, icy laugh. Aside from my father and brother, no one is stupid enough to ask me that. So do you know who I am? Her gaze turned predatory. The young master was too shocked to panic, but his massive ego wouldn't let him back down. He mocked her dusty clothes, assuming she was a nobody, and raised his hand to strike her. But Stephen intercepted him instantly, crushing his wrist. Total panic finally set in. His arrogant mask shattered, leaving only pure fear. The princess watched the spectacle with cold indifference. In her past life, he'd already be a corpse. Luckily for him, she was trying out this good person thing. She dropped the act, revealed her royal status, and warned the young master to fix his behavior immediately, unless he wanted to see her villain side. Without another word, Dorothy grabbed Izan and walked away. This news would reach the Duke's ears soon enough, and the fallout would be legendary. All she wanted was to go home, but as soon as she stepped inside the palace gates, she came face to face with the one person she dreaded most. The boy called out sister and lunged for a hug. The sudden invasion of her personal space made her flinch. Looking up, she drowned in Tion's suffocatingly intense gaze. Clad in a crisp academy uniform, his pristine appearance clashed violently with his disheveled, frantic aura. In that heartbeat, the little princess just wanted to vanish. Why did they always have to show up now? Just when she hit rock bottom. She'd sworn to bury the past and just survive, so why was fate still hunting her? It took 3 agonizing years to stitch those wounds shut, and now they were ripped wide open and bleeding out once more. Desperation fueled her as she dragged her brother back into the room and slammed the lock into place. A primal urge to scream consumed her. Instead, the agony transformed into a barrage of heart-wrenching questions for her brother. Had he ever actually loved her, or was bringing Tion here just another way to spit on her miserable life? He was oblivious to the wreckage he'd caused. All he knew was that he missed his sister to the point of breaking. Nights without sleep and days without food, all for this moment. Seeing her again felt like finally taking flight. But now his excuses felt like paper shields. He could only stutter about wanting to give little Doro a grand surprise. She cut him off with a gaze of ice. This isn't a surprise, it's a nightmare, she spat, sending her brother into a sobbing mess. He wasn't crying because of the lecture. He was terrified that Dora would shut him out forever. He offered a fragile apology, but the princess had already built a wall he couldn't scale. Massaging her aching temples, her inner rage boiled. Her brother always managed to play the victim. Despite her being the one in the trenches, she was always painted as the villain, the toxic side character in their story. Her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she refused to crack. She knew the golden rule of this palace. Only the favorites get the luxury of venting. For her, tears were nothing but fuel for their mockery. Pointless as popping bubbles, her father's blatant favoritism had forced her to padlock her heart for good. It wasn't until Dora was gone that her brother and Tian finally faced their own twisted reality. The girl they truly craved had always been the tragic Doro, Julia. She was just a background character all along. During those 3 long years, whispers reached them. Rumors of a princess who had single-handedly conquered a deadly plague. Stories of her tending to the forgotten and the homeless spread like wildfire. This side of her was something that Tian had never witnessed. She was a resilient wildflower, blooming defiantly on the edge of a jagged cliff. No harsh storm could dim her light. Suddenly, a cold wave of panic washed over Tian. The thought of other men circling her was unbearable. He'd crossed thousands of miles just to reach her side. He wanted to be there for her healing, but he never anticipated the raw intensity of her rejection. She tried to bolt, but his instincts were sharper. In a blur of motion, Tian's hand clamped around Doro's arm. Words poured out of him in a desperate torrent. 3 years of agonizing worry finally found their voice. With a newfound gentleness, he recalled every scar she'd earned. He'd seen her suffering from the front row. He vowed to be her shield against the storms. Then he dropped to one knee in a gesture of absolute surrender. It looked like a solemn marriage proposal. The princess could only stare, completely shell-shocked. Her heart hammered against her ribs in a rhythm of pure agony. Her mind flashed back to her previous life. She remembered groveling for a scrap of his attention, stripping away every ounce of her pride. And Taeon, he'd just turned his back on her without a second thought. The princess understood everything. Back then, Julia owned his heart. Since her rebirth, she'd scrubbed every trace of him from her soul. Those feelings were dead and buried. Even with his sincere confession, her heart remained a flat line. She tilted her head down, fighting back the bitter tears of a past that no longer mattered. Suddenly, Aisen's voice broke the tension. He was pouting with a swollen face, whining for her attention. Just like that, the heavy cloud of sorrow hanging over her heart vanished. She refused to be a prisoner of those cringy memories. It was time for a final, graceful exit. With a gentle tug, she freed her hand from Tian's grip. She claimed she had an important guest to attend to. She whisked Aisen away from the drama, her pace quickening with every step. She missed Aisen's petty smirk, and the crushing defeat reflected in Tian's eyes. Convinced Aisen needed medicine, she buried herself in the pharmacy, desperate to drown her feelings in work. Suddenly, warm breath tickled her ear, sending shivers down her spine. The little princess's face flushed a deep, instant crimson. Despite their past life intimacy, those memories felt like a lifetime ago. Her heart raced with an unfamiliar, chaotic heat. She squeezed her eyes shut as his lips drew near. A feather-light kiss landed, carrying a soft, whispered confession. That simple "I like you" shattered her composure. In her previous life, Aizen was just a shameless, teasing fox. He used to pester her daily with his antics. Surely this was just another one of his playful, mischievous pranks. She didn't dare hope for real love. Perhaps focusing on her career was a safer, more reliable bet for her. She never expected a full-blown rivalry to spark. Just then, Aizen was booted from the room, but he wasn't finished. To provoke, Aizen bragged about kissing the goddess's cheek. He was definitely doing the absolute most right now. He boasted about her tenderly applying his medicine. They'd be spending every weekend together, locked in their own world. Aizen shamelessly exaggerated his bond with little Doro. He wanted Tian to back off and just give up entirely. He knew who truly held the princess's heart. That meant he had to hustle twice as hard to win. Thinking Tian was the threat, he physically blocked the door. No way was he letting his rival step inside. With a straight face, he lied, saying the princess needed rest. Poor, naive Tian fell for the deception completely. His heart sank with regret as he turned away. Meanwhile, that devious boy flashed a triumphant, wicked little smirk. His scheme worked perfectly. He wouldn't let anyone, especially not Tian, interfere with his plans for the princess's heart. As they parted ways in bad moods, someone remained. The crown prince was still crouched, hiding in the shadows. He hugged his knees, looking utterly pitiful. His mind replayed the cold image of his sisters retreating back. Why didn't she like him? Was it because he wasn't smart or talented enough compared to his brilliant sister? To himself, he was just a useless fool. Someone who couldn't even earn a single sliver of affection. No wonder she ignored him. Who could love a pathetic crybaby? He fought desperately to hold back his tears. His small frame trembled with sorrow. If his existence made her unhappy, he'd disappear without a second thought. Just then, a maid spotted the boy curled in the corner. She'd heard rumors of the siblings' tense confrontation. Approaching the hall to check on him, she gasped. The crown prince looked up with a tear-streaked face. He was desperate for his sister's approval. He just didn't know how to reach her cold, icy heart. All he wanted was to make her happy. The maid mentioned the princess woke early for sword practice. Hope flickered in the prince's eyes once more. Her swordsmanship was legendary even at such a young age. He imagined her finally smiling at him. That vision alone gave him the courage he so desperately needed. He vowed to join the fencing competition. Elsewhere, a rejected Tian sought the prince's help to apologize. He needed to say sorry to Doro, but upon entering, he spotted a familiar cloth sitting on the table. It was the handkerchief he'd given her years ago. A simple gift he thought she'd long since forgotten. Against all odds, after all this time she had kept it. It wasn't lost, ruined, or discarded. The fabric was pristine and folded with extreme care. It looked as if it were her most prized treasure. This tiny detail spoke volumes about her feelings. She cherished it more than he ever dared to imagine. Hope surged through Tian's veins. Maybe he still had a chance. That night he appeared outside her window. On the balcony, Doro was sighing at the moon. She'd been harsh today, but it was for the best. No more distractions. She refused to be a love-struck tyrant again. This time she would choose a different path. Instead of her past mistakes, she'd help this remote village. She wanted to be a light for others. She had witnessed enough human misery and poverty. Seeing their struggles sparked a fire within her soul. Their pure joy upon receiving help was infectious. Their resilience made her decide to stay right here forever. The palace offered luxury, but she chose to shine here. She wanted to contribute her own unique strength. Quietly, she pressed the handkerchief to her heart. She felt Tian's lingering emotions, but she stayed firm. She wouldn't be that insecure girl again. But fate had a funny way of intervening that very night. A sudden breeze swept through the room. The handkerchief slipped from her grasp, fluttering helplessly into the night. Looking down, she froze. She met Tian's tender gaze. The cloth had landed right at his feet. It was like her secret feelings were caught red-handed. The little princess's face burned with sudden, intense heat. A sudden crimson flush stained her cheeks as she froze in a state of awkward paralysis. Eventually, she pressured Tian to vanish. It was better to return him to his original owner than reignite old flames. She tried to sever their past, but before she could blink, the young man had already taken flight. Scaling the tree with feline grace, he reached the second-floor balcony and gently offered the handkerchief to her. This version of Tian was a stranger to the princess. He was radiant and passionate, wearing his heart on his sleeve. This was clearly the man Julia had fallen for. The princess wanted to bolt, yet her concern for him kept her anchored. Suppressing her panic, she maintained her composure while helping him climb inside. The moment their eyes met, Tian finally delivered his long-overdue apology. He confessed his deep regret for choosing silence while she was suffering. She traced his palm with a hollow gaze, feeling his words from a distance. Witnessing her numbness, Tian's heart fractured with bitter pain. He replayed the years he'd abandoned her in the palace, haunted by his own inaction. He'd missed countless chances to pull her from the abyss, choosing cowardice over her rescue every single time. Because Dora always wore a mask of steel, Tian foolishly assumed the little princess was immune to sorrow. But even the strongest warriors have their breaking points. Now Tian was drowning in a sea of suffocating regret. He loathed himself for not doing more, at least so she wouldn't look so utterly shattered. Like a man possessed, he shouldered the entire blame, desperately begging for a single chance at redemption. Sadly, the princess's heart was a void. This apology, spanning 2 agonizing lifetimes, arrived far too late, leaving her unable to remember what it felt like to be loved. She still held the ghosts of his preferences, his love for bitter red wine and twilight strolls. He craved soft, gentle girls like Julia. He had so many loves, yet she was never one of them. A self-mocking smile touched her lips as she recalled his tragic demise. In her past life, she'd used toxic methods to force his affection, only to end up with a cold corpse. He chose death over her. That memory was the final devastating blow. Thinking of it, the little princess's eyes slowly welled with hot tears. She was moved. After all, she'd spent 2 lifetimes loving this man. Tian was an obsession she couldn't exorcise, but a warning voice in her heart screamed, "No. Karis, stop reaching for what isn't yours. The throne is his brother's. Tian belongs to Julia. She possessed nothing and deserved nothing." In that moment, it felt as if she'd been doused with freezing water. She bolted without looking back, ignoring Tian's shattered expression. Back in her bed, she clutched his handkerchief, her eyes echoing a profound loneliness. The past was dead. She had a kingdom to win and no room for the trivial distractions of a broken heart. At least she'd remain a beautiful memory to him. Then came the day of the grand sword competition. The prodigy princess was instantly dismissed as a weakling. Her opponent mocked her mercilessly before the duel even began. The arrogant brute advised her to retreat, flexing his massive muscles to intimidate the small girl. The crowd held their breath in pity. The man was a titan, easily 5 times. Her size, he looked capable of crushing her with a thumb. Everyone was certain she would lose. The physical gap was simply too massive. Up in the stands, Aizen couldn't sit still. He used his influence to secretly swap her opponent, but his meddling only fueled the giant's insufferable ego. The brute bellowed that the princess was nothing but a cheat, sneering that girls had no business swinging steel. Throughout the tirade, the princess didn't breathe a word. To the brainless fool, she calmly declared there was no need to switch her opponent. She gripped her wooden blade and entered the arena with a grace that silenced the stadium. Even if she fell, she looked every bit a queen, but the audience had miscalculated her power. What they expected to be a slaughter turned into a masterclass in total sword dominance. With a singular lightning-fast strike, she sent his weapon flying. A thunderous roar of applause erupted instantly. No one expected such monstrous power to be hidden in such an elegant frame. As she looked down at her fallen foe, the giant's arrogance had vanished, leaving him broken on the dirt. Thrown aside like a mangy stray, that crushing defeat ensured he'd never dare show his face in this city again. Next was the eldest brother's turn to enter the fray. Everyone underestimated the lean youth, but the power he unleashed was bone-chilling. His aura was even more menacing than the little princess's. No one could survive a single strike from his hand. Some opponents even started begging for mercy before setting foot in the arena. Watching this cowardice, the little princess couldn't help but scowl. This didn't match her memories at all. In her previous life, they only clashed once, and back then, her older brother couldn't even lift his weapon. That coward had offered zero resistance, letting her blade pierce straight through his heart. He let her kill him without mercy. Now a terrifying truth was slowly starting to crawl into the light. Panic suddenly gripped the little princess. She feared her years of cold hatred toward her brother were based on a massive lie. She worried the throne she craved had actually been a gift from him. For the first time, the princess unleashed her genius. Her elite skills left Tian and Aizen absolutely speechless. Was this really the fragile little girl they once knew? She was a whirlwind of grace and power, a sight so captivating that no one could tear their eyes away. Tian even feared he wasn't worthy of her brilliance. If only he'd confessed sooner, he wouldn't be drowning in this insecurity. He was certain he still held a place in her heart, but everything became a blur the moment Aizen appeared. On the other side, Aizen watched the duel with razor-sharp focus. He was well aware of the beast hiding within her. Despite knowing her secret strength, he still worried she might accidentally get hurt in the heat of the battle. With every clash of wooden swords, Aizen's heart hammered against his ribs, but seeing her emerge victorious brought him genuine joy. Both men were now determined to confess their feelings to little Doro as soon as the tournament ended. The stakes skyrocketed as the event reached its peak. The little princess tore through the brackets to reach the semifinals. But her next opponent was a familiar red-haired boy. He was the little beggar who used to secretly bring her vegetables. He had fed her every single day. He was just one of the many refugees the princess had saved in the past. He was her #1 fan, though they'd never met face-to-face. Now he stood before her battered and covered in wounds. Yet he lunged with desperate intensity. The princess had already crushed countless powerful elites with her ironclad will. She believed victory was already hers. The grand prize for the champion was 10 whole gold coins. That was enough to feed him and his sister for an entire month. The princess instantly saw through his desperation. But she showed no mercy. She needed that final spot, so the girl shifted her focus with cold, tactical precision. She ruthlessly targeted the boy's legs. One brutal takedown later, and the young man couldn't even stand up anymore. He gasped for air, eyes burning with resentment, while the princess simply looked down at him with icy calm. She wasn't ignorant of the commoner's struggle, but she wasn't a saint who could save every poor soul in the world. Right before leaving, she frankly revealed her identity. She told the boy to seek her out if he hit rock bottom. "Find me at the detached palace," she said, disappearing before the final round. The atmosphere turned suffocatingly tense. Facing her brother across the arena, the princess gripped her sword until her knuckles turned white. Her gaze became stone cold. Her hammering heart screamed to crush him, to prove that the throne was rightfully hers, just like in her past life. But a nagging voice whispered that he had always loved her. In that heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. Her mind flashed back to the day he died, just like this, only 3 paces away from her. They stood blade to blade, but back then his hand had trembled. He couldn't even hold his sword steady. He let her blade pierce his heart, yet he still smiled, telling her not to be sad as he died. The past and present began to blur into a bloody mess. The girl's expression hardened into a mask of ice. She was desperate to prove she earned the throne through her own strength. Then the crown prince finally spoke. He asked her if she wanted the win. The little princess's face immediately twisted into an expression of pure disgust. She didn't want a victory born from pity. Annoyed, she barked at her brother to finally make his move. Suddenly, a wave of razor-sharp sword intent surged toward her. Even with a wooden blade, the pressure was overwhelming. The heavy impact turned her arms to lead, but she refused to lose. Gritting her teeth, she pushed back with everything. She aimed a lethal strike at his chest, but just as it was about to land, she left herself wide open. Crack! The prince's sword slammed into her shoulder with devastating force. In that moment, both of them froze in shock. Her brother's eyes flooded with instant guilt as the little princess reeled from the impact of the blow. Frozen in shock, the little princess completely forgot her agony and the ongoing duel. The chilling truth dawned on her back. Then she was the one meant to be skewered for the crown. Her foolish brother had been dumb enough to sacrifice his life. How absolutely pathetic. Believing she earned this misery, a suffocating grief weighed heavy on the young princess's chest. She begged her brother to strike, but her eyes were already hollowed out by pure hopelessness. Why show any mercy? She was supposedly the victim who had endured every single injustice. Now her rage felt irrational. She should have loathed him for stealing her future. Yet in this moment, with the veil lifted, her target for hatred vanished. Finally, she let her wooden sword clatter to the ground. She stumbled away. The crown prince watched, bewildered by his sister's sudden explosive fury. He scrambled after her in a panic, but his feet caught on a stray rope. Suddenly, the sickening crack of snapping timber echoed directly above his head. The princess whirled around to witness the impending disaster, instantly disregarding her own mangled body. She shoved him aside. Was this enough to pay her blood debt? She braced for the crushing impact. Screams erupted as she collapsed into darkness, losing consciousness before the world went black. Fading memories of warmth resurfaced, blurring her father's cold favoritism into the background. It seemed her brother truly did care. Wrapped in unbearable pain, the girl simply waited for death. Her only regret was failing to offer a long-overdue apology before the end. However, when her eyes finally opened, she found herself in the Duke's estate for urgent care. Bandaged and bruised, she sat up only to be bombarded by her maid's frantic, worried scolding. How could you be so reckless? The princess looked down, unable to explain her instinct to save him. Was it to atone for her sins, or did she simply fear seeing him broken again? It didn't matter. She figured that if they were both in danger, no one would ever choose her first. Bitterness clouded her gaze as she spoke self-critically, but the maid wasn't having it. She cut her off, insisting they'd choose her every time. Two determined gazes met the princess's eyes. Though she doubted the truth of it, she forced a small, grateful smile for her own comfort. At least she wasn't abandoned this time. Meanwhile, the crown prince was a sobbing mess. Tian reported her awakening, but the news couldn't stem the tide of the young boy's tears. He felt utterly pathetic. Too weak to shield his sister, he only ever caused more trouble. At a loss for words, Tian could only offer a silent bow and slip out of the room. Outside, he crossed paths with Aizen, who was heading toward the princess's quarters. Tension instantly spiked. The air turned electric. Aizen didn't hold back, flat out declaring his deep feelings for little Doro. He demanded to know when they'd leave, complaining that their presence ruined the house's peace. Tian felt a massive red flag. His princess was just too captivating for her own good. People were naturally drawn to her light. If he didn't confess soon, he'd lose his chance forever. Suddenly, the maid's call shattered their jealous standoff. The princess's treatment was finally over. Hearing she was finished, Aizen bolted into the infirmary, his heart racing with anxiety. Seeing she wasn't mortally wounded, the heavy weight in his chest finally lifted. 1,000 words flooded his mind. He wanted to ask about every single scratch and bruise. He wanted to praise her insane bravery and beg her to stay safe, but he choked. He swallowed his pride. Aizen realized with a sting that his concern might be totally unrequited. A humble boy like him was no match for a noble princess. His rivalry with Tian felt like a joke. Maybe he never even crossed her mind. He stood in silence, watching the girl walk away. Little Doro never spared him a single glance. But she wasn't just being cold. That familiar face triggered haunting flashes of her past life and its dark secrets. She remembered that toxic man, the one who manipulated her into murdering her own brother. He was the architect of her misery. Little Doro loathed her own past foolishness. Unable to look Liz in the eye, her soul felt far more shattered than her body. Ghostly echoes of her previous life clawed at her. Back in her room, sleep was impossible. Her brother's blood-soaked visage haunted her mind. She yearned to delete her cruel younger self. If she vanished, her kind brother would reign as a legendary just emperor. Theon would cherish Julia, and Aizen would be a hero. Only Doro deserved hell's flames. A perfect world. So why let a villainess like her breathe? The princess curled up shivering. Dawn eventually bled through the curtains, yet she remained wide awake, tossing and turning. Dragging her heavy limbs, she sought a walk for clarity, but fate intervened. She crashed into Theon as he prepared to vanish. Both stood frozen in a heavy silence. Eventually, she forced a hollow smile. His silent departure stung, yet she had no right to stop him. Maybe forever was for the best. It was time to sever these forbidden, lingering feelings. But this version of Theon wasn't like the past. In this timeline, his heart belonged to Doro. Seeing her tear-filled eyes, he felt anchored. He finally understood his own true feelings. He couldn't bear to leave her side. His heart was locked on the little princess. But duty called him back to his studies. He needed to sharpen his strength. becoming powerful enough to shield his beloved from every cold injustice. Theon gazed at Doro, eyes burning with devotion. He dreamed of becoming her personal knight, guarding her through life's storms. In that moment, he ached to confess his burning love. But he hesitated, unsure of her feelings. A paralyzing fear gripped him. What if this was unrequited? What if Doro had already chosen a different path? Recalling Aizen's warning, he nervously questioned her. When she shook her head, his anxiety vanished instantly. With a radiant smile, he vowed to return to her. Doro waved, her heart aching. She assumed he loved another, preparing for an eternal goodbye. She wouldn't let greed win. This life was for penance. She refused to repeat history's tragedy. Memories of her past madness flooded back. Unloved and broken, she only knew how to take. Her love was a cage built of force. She had literally shackled Theon to her. Driven to prove she was superior to Julia, she gifted him a sprawling, blood-stained palace. She trampled over her people. Servants were executed. Even her loyal ministers weren't spared. Insane jealousy consumed her. She deluded herself that a grand palace would buy his affection. But her eager hopes were met with nothing but his cold, crushing disgust. Her toxic obsession killed him, eventually sending her to the blade. I'm a literal monster, she thought. No wonder he hated her. She watched him fade away, knowing her brother would soon follow. That night, her idiot brother shamelessly crashed her bed. She was drowning in a nightmare. The night of the coup replayed in vivid detail. Hidden truths began to unravel. Like silk peeling from a cocoon. It was her father's funeral the day it all broke. Fresh from the gore of the battlefield, she hadn't even washed the blood from her skin. Despite her legendary military feats, she never actually planned to steal the throne. But her father's final decree was the ultimate betrayal. He stood there and told them, "Protect the prince from the enemy." And that enemy, it was her, his own daughter. Even in sleep, the rage was electric. She grabbed her steel and stormed the funeral alone. History repeated itself in her mind. She screamed out her brother's sins with pure venom, then lunged forward blade first. Suddenly, the fog over her old memories lifted. She remembered it all, how her brother held back his strikes, his hair falling in clumps. Her cruelty was limitless. Every swing was a lethal strike, yet he refused to fight back. He fought with everything to shield her, finally driving his blade through the crown prince's heart. The gruesome nightmare shattered into a million pieces of soul-crushing despair. She broke down in tears. Victory should have tasted sweet, so why did a heavy, suffocating weight still haunt her soul? In that moment, reality and dreams blurred for little Doro. Suddenly, a massive, fluffy head appeared. Peeking through the door, her brother's familiar face instantly melted the terror, freezing her heart. Before she could even utter a word, the young man boldly announced he was sleeping there tonight. The grieving little princess was left totally speechless. She just turned away, giving him the cold shoulder. She chose to ignore her dorky brother, but the crown prince clearly felt his sister's sharp judgment. Awkwardly scratching his head, he thoughtfully tucked the little princess into her cozy, warm blankets. Can't sleep because you miss Mom. Seeing his sister remain silent, the young man pressed on. I'm still thinking about her too. But before he could finish, Doro cut him off with an icy stare. It was her fault. She was the reason father lost his wife and her brother lost his mother. They were meant to be a happy family of three. Her birth had triggered an irreversible tragedy. Her voice was calm, but her heart was bleeding inside. Then her brother suddenly cut in. That's not true. None of this is your fault, Doro. Mom never regretted a thing. It was just an accident. Her eyes went wide. After 2 whole lifetimes of confusion, someone finally told her the truth. She wasn't to blame. Holding back her tears, Doro's heart overflowed with pure, silent gratitude. This goofy brother was too much for her. He came for sleep but wouldn't stop yapping. He rambled deep into the night until suddenly the room fell into a peaceful silence. Only then did the little princess realize her brother had finally drifted off to dreamland. She tried to shove his arm away, but the sleepy prince just lazily rolled over in bed. It felt like a trap. Before she knew it, he was happily hogging all her blankets. Fine, just this once. The siblings cuddled together, falling into a deep, sweet sleep. After that night, her brother became a total clingy mess, just like when they were kids. From the smallest chore to the biggest task, the crown prince insisted on doing everything for her. Honestly, Doro was exhausted, at least before she could actually get a clean glass of water. Now she couldn't even get a decent cup of tea, but seeing his puppy dog eyes for praise, she just had to endure it. Since he was acting so obedient, she cooked up a little plan. Time to fix those grades. She lazily announced that she suddenly felt like studying. Acting like a strict supervisor, she began reciting the imperial family's massive, complex family tree. She made him transcribe it all. The crown prince slowly realized something was totally off. He couldn't put his finger on it. He was just helping his sister copy books. Right? Somehow he was the one doing all the learning. Looks like Big Bro finally gained some brain cells. As her mind wandered, Doro realized that having someone by her side didn't feel so bad after all. He finally finished the entire chapter, and the little princess collapsed from sheer laziness. The slacker life was her true calling. That's when her brother made a solemn vow about his future. He swore that for the next exam, he'd definitely crack the school's top 50 rankings. He didn't want to look like a loser in front of her. Meanwhile, Dora was internally rolling her eyes. Top 50, please. In her past life, the guy couldn't even make the top 300. But an excited crown prince was already holding out his pinky for a childish promise. Little Doro frowned at the cringe gesture, but she still gently locked her pinky with his. She hoped he'd grow into a wise ruler, someone far better than she had ever been. What she didn't see coming was her brother securing her own admission and status too. This life was nothing like the last one. Doro didn't know why, but she loved every second of it. Being loved meant she was no longer alone. Beside her, Isen flashed a bright, adoring grin. Deep down, the princess knew she couldn't resent Isen for crimes he hadn't even committed yet. Everyone deserves a shot at redemption, especially when their villain era hasn't actually started. With that thought, the princess let Isen step closer. Suddenly, a jacket still radiating his lingering body heat draped over her shoulders. The unexpected warmth left her stunned as a soft gardenia scent filled the air. A faint rosy blush crept silently onto the princess's cheeks. Before the moment faded, Isen pulled a beautifully wrapped gift from his vest, tied with delicate ribbons. Inside was a pristine snow-white handkerchief. In this empire, such a gift was a bold declaration of love. And the sword embroidery was exactly her style. She accepted it, a small smile lighting her face. She had no clue how much effort Isen had poured into this. He had noticed her carrying Theon's handkerchief and stubbornly decided to outdo him. He hand-stitched every single thread himself, desperate for the princess who always favored Theon to finally choose him. Then Isen hesitantly asked if Doro could grant him one small wish. Seeing no rejection in her eyes, he finally voiced his request. He wanted to write 2 lines on her cast. The girl almost nodded, but suddenly paused, confused. What a bizarre thing to ask. If it were her brother, she would get it. But coming from the cunning Isen, it felt suspicious. Probably just some polite well wishes. Still, she agreed. As Isen brought over the ink, he began to write with intense, focused precision. The princess felt her face burning again. Time seemed to stop as she watched him, mesmerized by his gentle expression. Finally, Isen finished looking satisfied with his work. She looked down at her arm and froze. It was a short poem about how sand endures endless friction before transforming into a radiant pearl. She knew he was referring to her tragic life, but she knew the truth: sometimes pain is just pain. Most grains of sand end up crushed in the dark forever, she thought bitterly. Yet she felt a wave of genuine gratitude. This man always showed up at her lowest points, shielding her from the world without asking for anything. Isen was the only person who truly saw her scars, her shame, and her deepest secrets. But because they were two of a kind, being together would only lead to mutual destruction. So despite his obvious feelings, the princess kept pushing him away. He was a living reminder of her trauma. She remembered her brother's death and her own cold walk toward the guillotine. She remembered Isen watching her wait for the end. "Why won't you just beg me to save you?" he had whispered, trembling. And her response, a bitter laugh. She'd spent her whole life chasing things meant for others: Theon, the throne, and her father's love. Her greed had left her with nothing. Only then did she remember why she even started. All she ever wanted was a kind word from her father, but destiny turned it into a bloodbath. Fate had marked her. Even without Isen, she was destined to be a walking disaster. In this second life, she refused to be greedy. She wouldn't let anyone else get hurt because of her. Though the loneliness was suffocating, she chose to walk alone. After all, she was used to it. After Isen left, she dragged herself back to her room, exhausted. A maid handed her a fresh letter. Expecting it to be from her brother, she grabbed it but saw the Emperor's seal. Her face drained of color instantly. Her nails dug into her palms. She was terrified of losing this life. She couldn't go back to that nightmare. Here, she had her own path and the dignity she died for. More importantly, here, she was just Doro. She wasn't that pathetic princess who loved, but was never loved back. Not the useless child without magic. Her father wouldn't even let her keep this tiny bit of peace. She opened the letter calmly, though her shaking hands gave her away. If he ordered her back, she'd rather give up her title than be that girl again. Luckily, it wasn't a summons. The Emperor simply ordered her to host a foreign delegation. She finally exhaled, but her heart felt heavy. How pathetic she had become. They only remember this discarded daughter when she's useful. Even though Alka's royalty loathed the Empire, the Emperor still threw an unloved princess at them like bait. She was just a pawn to humiliate. And her embarrassment meant zero to them. If she had a choice, our little princess would have refused in a heartbeat, but she knew the Emperor's ruthless ways. To protect her world, she forced herself to play along. More importantly, she had to stop a total war between nations. In her past life, the flames of war ignited because of Isen. That Alka prince was arrogant, especially after his fiancée ditched him for a commoner like Isen. Overnight, the proud royal became a joke. His first move as king declaring war, and the very first place he razed to the ground. was exactly where our princess stayed. Even now, those haunting visions of destruction flashed in her mind. If she could just change the prince's mind about Aizen, she could stop the coming apocalypse. Driven by urgency, the little princess rushed straight to Aizen's doorstep. He greeted her with a shy warmth that was adorable, making her burst into laughter. But then, the moment he mentioned meeting the Alka Royals too, she literally did a spit take with her tea. There was zero chance she'd let Aizen go. That arrogant prick would definitely target Aizen's status as an illegitimate son. They'd tear him apart just for existing near high society. She couldn't stand the thought of Aizen getting hurt, so she blurted out a lie about a psychic. She claimed his presence would trigger a death aura, her face turning red from the lie. Could a sharp guy like Aizen really fall for that? He saw right through her, but he played along. With a smirk, Aizen agreed to stay back, but he had one spicy condition of his own. He wanted to be her very first dance partner at her upcoming debutante ball. His eyes were sparkling. Her heart did a literal backflip. With total devotion, the young man reached out, his hand toward little Doro. She froze, losing her words as memories of her past life flooded back. Turning 18 should have been her peak, but in her previous life, it was a waking nightmare. Back then, there were no flowers or escorts. She just stood there while the crowd judged her. Nobody wanted to touch a fallen princess who had been tossed aside by her own family. To make it worse, she was magicless. Starving for affection, she just endured the shame, praying for the torture to end. Eventually, her brother forced Tion to step in. Trapped by his friend's gaze, Tion only asked her to dance because he had to. He clearly hated being near her, but our poor naive girl mistook his pity for true salvation. She wasted years loving him, but now she realized Tion probably loathed her. The princess was drowning in those bitter memories until Aizen's voice finally snapped her back to reality. Looking up, she saw his puppy dog eyes waiting for an answer. That pure, expectant look made her heart skip a beat. Since she was done chasing Tion anyway, she accepted Aizen's request. Time flew by, and that buff Alka prince arrived right on schedule looking for trouble. Doro played the perfect hostess, greeting them with grace. But the arrogant prince, he was already acting superior rudely, claiming that Doro's face was her only redeeming quality. She kept a polite smile, but in her head she was already throwing hands. The officials tried to play peacemaker, but the prince just kept main character and getting even louder to show off. He flexed by summoning magic, mocking the princess for being a loser who couldn't use spirit power. Watching him act like a desperate circus clown, our girl just gave him the cold shoulder. She couldn't use magic, sure, but she reminded the prince that Alka was a tiny speck. As an imperial princess, she was technically his equal, sitting high above his small throne. Even without mana, she still had the power to wipe his kingdom off the map. Her ice-cold confidence left him fuming and embarrassed, so the prince switched his petty tactics. He started trashing her for failing to enter the academy, not realizing he'd just crossed the line. Little Doro reached her limit. With a chilling smirk, she challenged the boy to a duel. She promised him a crushing defeat, as they both staked their entire honor on the outcome. Round 1 was a battle of wits, and the arrogant prince was oozing with confidence. This elite Ebisu Academy genius refused to lose to some useless country flower like her. His ego was through the roof, but a brutal reality check was coming for him. The princess sipped tea elegantly while acing everything, leaving a fumbling Nereus in the dust. The victor was clear, but the stubborn brat still refused to offer a single apology. He bragged that book smarts meant nothing, and vowed to be ruthless in the next stage. His desperate attempt to save face only made the little princess want to burst out laughing. "Draw your blade, then." Her cold gaze was filled with absolute savage disdain. Nereus turned red with pure rage. As a supreme genius, he'd never felt such disrespect. He vowed to make her pay, but round 2 began, and she instantly seized control. Before he could even blink, her cold steel was already pressed firmly against his jugular. She gave a mocking grin as Nereus, shattered by the total defeat, suddenly collapsed. Good grief, the disrespect was unreal. How dare a girl without a single drop of spiritual energy humiliate him before such a massive crowd? In that frantic moment, the vile Nereus unmasked his hideous true self. Cackling like a madman, he unleashed a massive wave of water. Our defenseless princess was swallowed whole by the flood. That familiar, crushing suffocation gripped her throat. It was spiritual power, the eternal nightmare she could never escape. Her own father despised her because of it. Even her resentment for her brother stemmed from this cursed energy. Why did it have to control her entire fate? This archaic obsession ends right now. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped her blade. Right under the shocked eyes of the masses, she tore through that massive water elemental with her bare hands. Panic-stricken guards rushed to her side, checking for wounds, but she just brushed off the droplets with icy composure. Teaching Nereus a lesson was the original plan, but now she was truly livid. That pompous prince of Alke lost his swagger in a heartbeat. He stammered, trying to defend his cowardly betrayal with pathetic excuses, but our furious princess was done listening to his garbage. Violence is the only language some guests understand. Gripping her steel, she began her lethal march toward the youth. Each step resonated with fury as her eyes flared a blood red. She looked down with the gaze of a god, crushing a mere insect. The thick-headed prince recoiled in horror at her sudden transformation, but his massive ego blocked any thought of an apology. Surely what just occurred was a total fluke. He was born with elite spiritual power. No way he would lose to talentless trash. Suddenly, a relentless storm of steel rained down upon him. Her movements were a blur of speed and pure savagery. The coward could only scramble away like a rat until her blade found his throat. Like a striking silver dragon, her eyes were absolute zero, staring at him as if he were already a corpse. Through gritted teeth, she snarled that even without magic she would grind him into the dirt like a bug. And just like that, the one-sided circus was over. She had just given a masterclass on what true overwhelming power looks like. Yet back in the silence of her room, anxiety crept in. Because for a split second, she had tasted raw bloodlust. The princess knew that dark, murderous hunger all too well. One more second and her entire second chance at life would have gone up in flames, reverting her back into that heartless, obsessed tyrant. But honestly, why even fight it? Nothing ever changes. That loser Nereus was still the high and mighty crown prince of Alka. Her dim-witted brother still held their father's heart. Theon was still obsessed with Julia just like before, only she was left with scraps despite all her desperate struggling. Staring at her palms, she whispered to the shadows. Maybe it was time to retire her blade, but then the door was nearly kicked off its hinges. Eason burst in looking like a nervous wreck. He lunged straight for her side in a panic. His teary eyes searched her for any sign of a scratch. Once he saw she was unharmed, his racing heart finally slowed down. Wasting no time, he pulled out his violin like a sacred treasure, serenading her like a fairy tale prince. The soothing music began to heal her jagged nerves until the vibe was ruined by another uninvited guest. It was that Alka prince again, determined to dodge the tragic end of her previous life. She refused to let these fated enemies cross paths. But the shameless brat put on a fake apology act, begging for her mercy. Of course, this peace offering was just a smokescreen for a much darker scheme. He invited her to the Alka banquet, already having spun a web of lies about the incident. To his king, he was counting on a royal beatdown. Naturally, our girl saw right through Nereus's pathetic little stunt. He was clearly setting the stage for her public execution at the party. But she accepted anyway. As the black sheep princess, she did not exactly have the luxury of saying no. She just prayed for a moment of silence. She was drained. If all they wanted was her public humiliation, then bring it on. It was not her first rodeo. She would play along with their dramatic little play and act like the perfect submissive fool. With a cold shoulder, she turned away, acting like she did not care. Nereus, thinking he had won, smugly followed her. Word spread of him lurking behind the drapes, peeking out as a dark glint flickered in his gaze. Under the dim glow, his delicate features twisted. "So this is the brat who troubled you," the sickly youth hissed. But a hidden plot for vengeance already brewed. Meanwhile, that disastrous gala unfolded exactly as the tiny princess predicted. King Alka offered a fake apology, though his arrogant voice dripped with shameless, condescending triumph. He acted like Nereus wounding others was a flex, claiming her lack of magic made the injury her own fault. The little princess just watched their pathetic performance with cold, calculating eyes. She calmly sipped her crimson tea, her soul already hardened against these venomous insults. However, the man's next words made her entire frame lock up in sudden tension. "I have heard that Her Highness has recovered, yet no orders came from the Emperor," he sneered, mocking her status. Having endured every injustice, the little princess could only swallow the burning bitterness in her heart. "It is fine. Just survive this moment." She struggled to keep her fading dignity while playing along to end this sickening feast. In the past, she would have thrown a massive tantrum, but now she only wanted to protect her current peace. She felt no resentment. This quiet life was all she ever truly desired. Keeping the peace between nations was a mercy, knowing it would spare countless citizens from a bloody conflict. A soft, grateful smile finally touched the little princess's face. Suddenly, she remembered the girl who delivered her vegetables had not shown up for several months. Did something happen? To find the truth, she ventured into the treacherous mining district. The little beggar nearby gaped in total disbelief, seeing the princess draped in coarse linen and a mud-stained tattered skirt. Yet not a hint of disgust touched the girl's eyes. It was in that very moment that Joy realized this princess was nothing like those arrogant, high and mighty nobles. Little Dora's motives were far simpler. She just wanted to save as many people as possible. She sought to atone for her past, and Joy's current nightmare was the exact tragedy she failed to stop before. The Empire owned thousands of mines, but only small children could squeeze into the deepest shafts for the lowest cost. Thus, kids from poor families became the primary choice for cheap, disposable labor. In her previous life, the princess had witnessed this dark reality firsthand. She had signed many laws banning child labor, but those charitable policies meant to help only backfired. They made her look like a foolish tyrant hated by thousands. Some even accused her of stealing the children's only source of income. Even now she did not understand if her past self was right or wrong. But when Joy begged for her brother's life, she agreed instantly. The little princess's focus slowly returned to the present. She let Joy lead the way, but even with her mental prep, the girl's actual living conditions made her heart tremble. The foul stench of sewage was everywhere, and skeletal people lay in the streets like living corpses. This was the hell Joy had been forced to call home. She never imagined the prosperous empire hid such horrific suffering behind its golden gates. The seeds of revolution were planted once more, though this time she would not be as reckless as before. Soon the trio reached Joy's shack and found a frail boy shivering in a dark corner. He lunged toward his sister the moment she entered. However, a drunken voice suddenly boomed from the doorway. It was the children's father. He was the monster who sold Joy and her brother to those deadly mines, and the princess came to teach him a lesson. She grabbed Joy's hand, leading them toward the man while the knight behind her, acting on his master's command, delivered a brutal, well-deserved beatdown to that greedy father. The siblings felt like they were in a dream. They were brought back to the temporary palace, where the princess gave them fresh clothes and spacious rooms to live in. But Joy, being the older sister, could not relax. She knew there was no such thing as a free lunch. Nobles never do favors for free, so she cautiously asked the little princess why she had saved them. She learned fast, no favor is free. Instinctively, she shielded her little brother from the looming threat. But the next twist left her stunned. The princess's conditions, simply for the boy to thrive and grow. They were led to a massive, overflowing banquet. The aromatic feast practically glowed under the flickering candlelight. It was pure bliss until chaos erupted. Manipulated by Ison, the siblings stumbled straight into a trap. They ruined the princess's handkerchief, the one precious memento Theon had ever gifted her. Pure rage blinded her instantly. By the time she blinked, violent red marks stained the air, slapped across the boy's face. Trembling with fury, she raised her hand to strike again. But Ison's crocodile tears stopped her cold. She realized, defeated, that he'd orchestrated this entire disaster. He played the victim perfectly. Using Joy to destroy her keepsake, his villainy was chillingly calculated. She'd actually hoped he could change. A bitter, self-deprecating smirk played on the princess's lips. But who was she to judge? In her past life, she was just as toxic. Memories of her first meeting with Ison resurfaced. Back then, she'd unearthed his darkest hidden secret. He'd drop his handkerchief on purpose, waiting for noble ladies to bow before him. He craved that power trip, only to mock the girls who dared to admire him. She was the first to see through his mask, the first to catch his pathetic game. Embracing her inner villain, she approached him first. Right then, the seeds of corruption took root. Together, they nurtured a poisonous sin. Schemes unfolded in the shadows as she made a fatal choice. Her ultimate regret, murdering the brother who adored her just to grasp a blood-soaked crown. She broke down in hysterical sobs. Victory tasted like ash. Then the door creaked open. Theo saw her twisted, ugly reality. Desperate, the princess clung to him like a dying lifeline. She begged him to share her hollow throne, oblivious that his heart was already dead to her. From day one, eventually, Theo became the husband she obsessed over with terrifying intensity. His gaze grew colder every morning, yet she tried every desperate trick to win his favor. Chasing a man who felt nothing, she draped herself in jewels and showered him with riches. She planned a golden fortress for their love. Her soul curdled, turning sinister and cruel. Spiraling into madness, she became a stranger. Delusional, she hallucinated a romance that didn't exist. With bloody hands, she built a gilded cage imprisoning Theo and her own shattered soul. She lived in a fever dream, refusing to wake. He countered with icy silence and neglect. To defy her, he wrote secret letters to Julia. He left his new bride rotting in loneliness. Abandoned, his rejection only pushed her deeper into a spiral of obsessive, unhinged love. Having nothing to begin with, Theo was the only anchor she had left. He was her driftwood in a stormy sea. She'd sacrifice anything just to belong to him. Her first love, her husband, her everything. He was her only salvation and her darkest fixation. She wasted her youth on a one-sided devotion to Theo, but her only reward was crushing heartbreak. In the end, he only had eyes for his true first love. Her golden palace became a glittering prison where she waited for a man who never came. Paranoia consumed her. No amount of diamonds could mask the hollow, gaunt ghost in the mirror. The radiant flower had withered into a bitter, aging shadow. Finally, she snapped. As her maid adjusted her earrings, the princess exploded. She violently ripped the jewelry away. Blood dripped down her face, her eyes wild with madness. Suddenly, the door swung open. Spotting her husband, her eyes sparked with hope, but a cold reality was waiting for her. He unleashed a verbal storm, furious she'd exiled Julia's family from the capital. His venomous words crushed her soul. The light in her eyes died. He'd never seek her out. If only Julia would just vanish. Dark, poisonous thoughts began to fester in her mind. The tiny shred of humanity left stopped her for now, but the shadows were closing in. Who could have imagined that poor girl meeting her end at the hands of bandits? When the news hit the capital, that morning the little princess sprang from her throne with joy completely blind to the fleeting shadow of malice in Aizen's gaze. Clueless about the weight of Julia's demise, she naively rushed to Theon's side like a stumbling child. She chased after love, unaware that the man mourning his lost soulmate had already been consumed by darkness. Drowning in agony, he was merely waiting for the girl to arrive so he could fulfill his twisted sense of justice. Still stubbornly pinning Julia's death on Doro, he intentionally selected their very wedding suite for his plan. He chose it as the site for the gallows, a brutal scheme designed to force his blameless bride into a lifetime of regret. From that moment on, the little princess was haunted by visions of blood and terror. One nightmare followed another as she slowly lost all interest in the Empire's grand politics, right up until the blade of the guillotine loomed. Only then, in her final moments, did she mourn her wasted existence. She finally uncovered Aizen's repulsive games. He had pulled every string just to snatch the throne from her grasp. Even at death's door, Aizen's obsession remained. He whispered that she could survive. If she only wed him, yet she spat back a bitter laugh and declined. Aizen was always a venomous snake, yet she never guessed the staggering price he paid to trigger her rebirth. It turns out her second chance was bought with Aizen's desperate pleas to the spirit of light. He traded everything for one more encounter, sacrificing his soul for his one true love. Yet, he never breathed a word. He didn't want her bound to him by pity. Doro was destined to be the peerless empress, but watching her inner circle grow, Princess Elise couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy. Why couldn't she love him back? He could be her most loyal dog. He could be soft and noble like Theon, yet why did his struggle to change never touch her soul? That's when the rod of envy first sprouted within him, driving him toward the same vile tactics. As in their previous life, he was the one who actively blackmailed Joe and his sibling. He deliberately schemed to snatch Theon's handkerchief, fully aware it would ignite the princess's fury. He was just desperate to prove that his supposedly useless existence actually mattered. Tragically, his master plan only earned him a stinging slap. He clutched his burning cheek in utter shock. Looking up, he saw only the princess's cold, unwavering sorrow. Her fragile frame trembled with emotion. It felt exactly like that final, agonizing moment at the execution grounds in their past life. Suddenly, Aizen realized it wasn't the ruined handkerchief that she despised. It was his calculated lies. She feared that once his greed started, there would be no stopping it. She was terrified the seeds of malice would poison them once more. In that second time, stood still. The princess stubbornly turned her face away, but Aizen silently pulled her into a desperate embrace from behind. Faint, broken apologies reached her ears. Finally, the girl's tears spilled over. This was the Aizen she remembered. Once as radiant as the sun, he was now like a terrified child, pleading for her not to loathe him. She could no longer blame him for his past crimes. It turned out she was the one still trapped in yesterday's shadows. As Aizen's only ally, she had barely offered him any warmth. But what sin had this boy actually committed? He was simply paralyzed by the fear of being discarded. He looked up with a gaze full of yearning. Like a stray puppy, he left the soft-hearted princess unable to utter another harsh word. Perhaps things could change. Maybe they wouldn't spiral toward the same blood-soaked finale as before. Choosing to believe once more, she finally released the bitter memories that had shackled her heart. That cold-hearted Theon wasn't worth her devotion. Now her biggest priority was learning to value her own soul. Yet just as her new life was finding its rhythm, her biased father, the Emperor, was ready to stir the pot once again. Hearing of his daughter's brilliance, his ego flared and he prepared to summon her back to the capital. But the girl who once begged for his love died in those shadows. This princess no longer craves anyone's pity. She is the saint who cured the plague and the genius who dominated the arena, swordmaster, diplomatic genius, and the Empire's most beloved golden girl. The Emperor paces eyes swirling with a dark storm as reports flood in. As the kingdom worships her every move, the weight of the truth hits him. Shadows loom over the throne. Only the true heir can secure the royal legacy. Her perfection is a total threat. Exile to the countryside was meant to break her. A cold warning to stay in her lane, yet she blossomed brilliantly in the mud. Now the almighty Emperor is drowning in regret, failing to save their bond. He fears his daughter's hunger for power will swallow her brother's throne. Suddenly, the Academy's transfer exam opens, and he tosses her a bone. He waits smugly, expecting his little girl to bow down in gratitude. Unaware of his games, Doro seeks out the knight who forged her into a weapon. Her mask slips as she admits she's done with the soul-crushing boredom of study. Under Stephen's worried gaze, the princess stands on the edge of burnout. She misses the rhythm of the blade, those days where she felt truly alive. With steel in hand, she transformed into a force of nature once more. An invincible empress, but those are dangerous dreams for the forgotten Doro. She's told to be a quiet pawn, and the realization stings her eyes. She can't bear to meet Stephen's gaze as the heavy door seals her fate. Their paths diverge, and the princess retreats back into her shell of silence. But every tear and every change was caught by Aizen watching from the shadows. He's convinced she hates him for ruining Tion's handkerchief, a mistake that haunts him. Determined to make it right, he sets out to find the rarest flower, a gift for his muse. Meanwhile, the princess realizes her shadow has vanished. There's no sign of Aizen anywhere. The villa feels suddenly hauntingly empty. Panic sets in, forcing her to lead a search party deep into the dark woods. There he is, clinging to a lethal cliffside for a flower that glows like a star. A one-of-a-kind treasure, for a girl who deserves the whole world. He ignores the deadly drop fueled by devotion as jagged rocks tear at him. His hands are shredded, but he finally grasps the bloom before losing his footing. He plummets down the ravine. When Doro finds him, the sight is devastating. He's broken and bleeding, but he's protecting that white flower with his life. He clumsily wipes his tears, trying to hide the pain as Doro approaches. He covers his face, terrified his bloody state will make her look away in disgust. Her heart shatters. She never imagined someone would walk through death for her. This is raw devotion. Aizen's love is a truth she can no longer ignore. Past lives and present moments collide, and she finally sees his heart clearly. He was always there, her silent anchor in the storm and her secret redemption. Through 2 lifetimes of pain, they've been each other's only constant. He loves her with the same desperate fire she once felt for Tion. Mud and blood don't matter. She reaches out gently, brushing his bruised cheeks. He flinches, afraid his filth will ruin her, but Doro's tears speak volumes. She doesn't care about the dirt. To her, he's beautiful. She takes the bloom. She tucks the glowing flower into her hair as the moonlight bathes them. The ghosts of their past vanish. In this moment, time simply stops turning. Their smiles bridge the gap, turning years of trauma into the purest love. But that bliss is fleeting. A cold decree from the Emperor finally reaches the little princess. The once obedient girl chooses defiance. She is done chasing the ghost of a father's love. Yet, as that icy command lands, a wave of self-pity crashes over her soul. She had dreamed of this reunion, imagining him asking if her health had finally improved. 3 years of silence. Now her hopes crumble and transform into something bitter. It was all a cruel joke. Her father's heart remains untouched by guilt after abandoning her. Not even a fake apology. To the Emperor, she was never truly his daughter. She is done being his puppet. If kindness is dead, do not expect her submission. She turns her back on the summons. Meanwhile, word of her return reaches the Crown Prince. He rushes to tell Theon, but finds his friend wearing a mask of pure dread. Before the prince can speak, Theon flees, claiming a sudden and mysterious illness. Julia chases after him. The little prince assumes it is just a secret office romance. He has no idea that a dark elf's curse is currently devouring his friend's soul. Sudden searing chest pains and blinding vertigo recently brought Theon to his knees. He woke up next to a mangled crow, a chilling omen of the chaos to come. He tried to brush it off as a fluke. But the nightmare was only beginning. Strange occurrences began to pile up. By the time he sensed the trap, it was too late. A dark elf had latched onto his life like a parasite fueling a terrifying bloodlust. He is losing control. His bloodline hasn't seen a true awakening in over 100 years. The corruption is spreading fast. He fears he might become a monster and hurt everyone. Only Julia knows his secret. He considers seeking the prince, but fears Dora might find out. He would rather suffer in silence than let his beloved girl worry for even a second. He fights to cage the volatile magic inside. His thoughts drift toward the little princess. He must master this lethal power before their fated reunion at the grand debut. The princess and Aizen arrive like a storm. Dora's elegance instantly steals the spotlight. Aizen's charm has the ladies swooning, while jealous nobles begin to spit their venom. Vipers whispered about her being abandoned while throwing insults at Aizen's lowly birth. The crowd waited for a disaster, unaware that this duo already owned the ballroom. Suddenly, a commotion erupts near the stage. The evening's pianist has vanished in an emergency. Panic sets in as the manager breaks down. That is when Aizen makes his move. Aizen offers his hands to the keys. The lead singer just scoffs in pure disbelief. Could a bastard truly play a masterpiece? With no options left, she reluctantly agrees. She braced for a train wreck. Instead, Aizen's talent was nothing short of divine. Melodies danced under his fingertips, casting a hypnotic spell over every soul in the room. The grand hall faded as his performance ascended. Every young lady was completely enthralled. Applause washed over him like a tide, but his eyes were locked on only Dora. He dedicated the song Gloria to her, a silent confession woven into every single note. He would crown his queen in glory. The room exploded in a deafening ovation. Ignoring the fawning aristocrats, he flashes a bright, playful wave at his princess. Overwhelmed, Dora retreats to the shadows, but Aizen is already there waiting for her. They share a moment. Suddenly, the toxic whispers of noble ladies cut through the air. They dissected royal scandals like vultures, oblivious to who was listening nearby. The sharp insults made her flinch. She was far too used to their cold malice. Aizen watched her with a gentle gaze, desperate to heal her wounded heart. She braced herself against the cold judgment, a lonely princess in a room of wolves. Out of nowhere, the usually poised Ison snapped. He lunged forward to shield her splashing wine at those toxic nobles. Even drenched in red wine, the harpies didn't stop their malicious gossip. With biting sarcasm, they mocked her for being the unwanted child. Every sharp word pierced the young princess's fragile heart. Deep traumas bled anew as if a ruthless executioner were stripping away her very last shred of dignity. A princess should command respect and silence them, yet those cruel insults left her completely speechless and broken. She understood her tragic fate better than anyone. Any desperate excuse would just be pathetic. With a mask of icy calm, the little princess turned to leave. She couldn't endure another second in this suffocating den of lies. But suddenly, armored guards blocked her path like a steel wall. The lead envoy revealed a decree signed by the emperor himself. He barked orders at the young princess, demanding her immediate return to the palace. The helpless girl stood frozen, abandoned with no one to save her. Submission was her only choice, but when she begged for a moment to pack her few precious belongings, the envoy shut her down. He snarled that any delay was high treason, and he would use force. In that dark moment, the princess realized her cold-hearted father wouldn't even grant her the chance to say goodbye to her found family or the memories that had kept her alive for years. They would stay in this forgotten land while she was dragged back to a loveless, gilded cage, to face a father who only saw her as a pawn. Desperate, the girl penned a final detailed letter. She poured her soul into final goodbyes for those who truly loved her, then pressed the paper into Eisen's hand. Her eyes were hollow with despair as the guards roughly hurried her toward the waiting carriage. She walked away with forced resolve, until Eisen suddenly lunged forward to pull her into a final hug. A soft kiss landed on her forehead as they vowed to find their way back to each other. Just before her adulthood ceremony, the princess finally returns home, but the moment she sees the emperor, she demands, "Why drag me back now?" Her voice rang with hidden fury. Enraged by her defiance, the emperor slammed the table with fury. He coldly stated that her 3-year exile was over. It was time to stop playing and fulfill her royal duties. Hearing this, a self-deprecating laugh escaped her lips. She stared down her furious father, her gaze hiding a dark storm. Her calm eyes reflected a lethal determination. What had this princess title ever actually given her? Was it the agonizing jealousy born from injustice, or the sting of a life spent in despair? The resentment of apologizing for sins she never committed, the trauma of being unloved and discarded. While growing up, or a hatred so deep it couldn't be let go, she had one burning question for him. Why even have me? Why not let me die as an infant? At least then I would be free. I wouldn't have to live in this paranoid madness. She almost screamed it, but ultimately lowered her head in silence. The emperor seemed to realize he had lost control, but his suffocating pride wouldn't allow for a single word of apology. He coldly reminded her that she had feasted on royal privileges her whole life. Now preserving the family glory was her only purpose. Coincidentally, a transfer student spot opened at the prestigious academy. He commanded little Doro to represent the throne in this elite trial. The royals required a perfect score to reclaim their fading dignity. Deep down, he also hoped this would bridge the gap between them. He knew she had always starved for his validation. But when he finally offered her a chance to prove herself, Doro shut him down without a second thought. In her previous life, she would have bled for a single word of praise from this man. But now, she was done. This hollow connection wasn't worth her soul. She just needed a way out. Burning with humiliated rage, the emperor wouldn't let his puppet slip away so easily. He arrogantly barked that her only right was to obey. In that cold instant only, hollow disappointment lingered in her gaze, but a spark of dangerous resolve had ignited in her heart. A perfect plan for rebellion took root in her mind. For the first time, this flightless bird was preparing to tear her father's world down. Nobody suspected the empire's perfect little princess. A total 0 on the most crucial exam. It is the lowest score in the academy's history. She managed to dodge every single correct answer, and the emperor is absolutely livid. The moment the little princess steps through the door, he hurls the test papers at her head. 0 points, a grade unheard of since the school's founding. This is a brand of pure humiliation. Before the entire royal court, the emperor spits insults at her, blind to her crushing desolation. With hollow eyes, the little princess asks if he ever truly saw her as his own daughter. Does he even remember her birth? The emperor flinches with guilt, but she just laughs. She mocks her own existence. How could he forget that her birthday is his wife's death anniversary? A wound left festering for over 10 years. This day should have been filled with blessings. Instead, it is the gloomiest day of the year. Why does her father throw massive parties? He celebrates her brother's birthday with grand feasts, but won't even send her a single flower. In her past life, she blamed herself for his coldness. Her childhood was a wasteland of neglect. The little princess lifts her head, locking eyes with the man to ask one final question. A secret buried in her heart for ages. Does Daddy regret not letting her die back then? Mom would still be alive, her brother wouldn't be motherless, and they would have been happy. She felt like the only mistake in the family. Her words strike the emperor's rawest nerve. He roars at her to shut up immediately. A second later, a sharp slap cracks across her face. The princess reels. Even the man is stunned by his violence, staring at her swollen cheek. A wave of helplessness hits him, but the princess has already drifted into a terrifying, dead-eyed calm. She touches her stinging face, but the physical blow is nothing compared to her shattered heart. Horrific memories resurface, like that kidnapping years ago, when she nearly lost her life. When she dragged her broken body back to the palace, she was met only with icy scoldings. He blamed her for shaming the royal name, and didn't even punish the monsters who tortured her. All she ever craved was one warm hug, a single moment of genuine fatherly concern. But he couldn't give her the bare minimum. 2 lifetimes of trauma finally explode within her. Losing her royal composure, she sees the emperor's rage finally dissolve into hollow, useless regret. But what's the point? She gives a stiff robotic bow and walks away without looking back. The heavy door slams, severing their bond. She thought she could just pretend to be fine. She tried to be strong, but the moment she sees Stephen, the little princess completely breaks down. She didn't cry during the forced apologies, or when her family abandoned her to the shadows. She didn't cry when her father struck her, but in Stephen's arms, her tears just won't stop. She begs to go home, back to the villa that serves as her only true sanctuary. Stephen can only offer gentle words of comfort. In his mind, Doro was always so invincible. She was brave, yet now she looks so fragile. He holds her tight to shield her grief. He provides a brief spark of warmth in that cold palace, until Doro finally regains her breath. She wipes her face in embarrassment. She must look like a total disaster right now. Suddenly, she spots the last person she wanted to see. Tian is standing there witnessing her lowest moment. The princess looks away, unable to face him. Why does he always see her at her worst? She has moved on, yet a tiny spark of longing remains. Surprisingly, there is no mockery. The young man gently offers her a jar of healing salve, a kindness he never showed before. However, her heart no longer holds that old love. She accepts it as a simple, friendly gesture. She will treasure this rare friendship. With that thought, she gives Tian a faint, bittersweet smile. Then she turns and leaves. Back in her room, the princess slumps over her desk exhausted. The ointment makes her think of Ison far away at the villa. How is he doing? She suddenly wants to write him a letter confessing all the pain she suffered at the palace. She craves a single spark of warmth right now. The little princess finally realizes Ison's true weight in her heart. Once master and servant, they're now soul-bound partners who share every hidden secret. A dried flower becomes her bookmark. She yearns to say, "I miss you," but the ink stays dry. Should she confess her palace hell or the stinging slap that crushed her pride? Doro hesitates, paralyzed by doubt. She finally drops the pen, surrendering to the silence. It's useless. Father won't let her leave. Maybe she's destined to rot within these cold walls. Unbeknownst to her, Ison pined for her too. Meanwhile, the emperor is haunted by her parting image. Her hatred cuts deep. He remembers her desperate glare. Did you want me to die? What father desires his child's pain? He never actually wished for her end. Her accusations echo, if only mother lived. The dark truth, he'd actually felt it. To bring his wife back, he'd have sacrificed Doro, a truly heartless, selfish man. Blinded by grief, he ignored the neglected princess struggling to survive in the shadows. Years later, amidst the Empress's roses, the emperor finally faces his forgotten daughter. He'd ignored her beauty, those innocent fawn-like eyes that mirrored his late wife perfectly. The resemblance is haunting. Had he known she'd be this brilliant, he might have embraced her. But when told she can't summon spirits, his gaze turns back to icy contempt. A spiritless puppet is a stain on the crown, signaling the end of their centuries-long reign. The throne's foundation is cracking. The era of the Mirinier is slowly crumbling to dust. His wife died for a defective child. This is a reality the emperor refuses to accept. Meanwhile, the Siscon crown prince is a sobbing mess. He'd planned their whole school life. But she scored a 0. How could my genius sister fail so spectacularly? He wails. Young Tian explains getting a 0 is actually hard. You must dodge every single right answer. With over 1,000 questions missing, every one is a mathematical miracle. Her true potential is staggering. The prince nods, his faith in her genius instantly restored. He knew she was elite. Meanwhile, the little princess prays for a miracle to return home. The palace feels like a slow death. Suddenly, Doro's eyes fly open in pure disbelief. The villa staff arrived. Is this a dream? Before she can blink, a maid pulls her close. The familiar scent and soft fabric bring a wave of long-lost happiness. She's paralyzed with joy. It feels like home again. She leans into the maid's gentle, motherly touch. Listening to her brother's frantic chirping, she finally understands what it means to be loved. Tears well up as a radiant smile breaks through. Then the whole group engulfs her. The villa is now where her family stands. Suddenly, the prince hears a thud. Father the prince prepares to rush to his sister, but a shadow falls. Tian clutches his chest and collapses. A bitter smile fades. The dark elf curse has struck. Lately, dead animals haunt his room. Suppressing the darkness is literally draining his life force. The prince offers desperate comfort. He's been scouring ancient scrolls for any lead. Legends speak of light spirits, purifying the dark. The little princess is Tion's only hope. He must move fast before the curse consumes Tion's soul. The Empire's fate hangs in the balance. Doro basks in her reunion, oblivious to the life-or-death drama unfolding in her brother's wing. Watching from the shadows, the Emperor feels a toxic mix of envy and crushing regret. The palace atmosphere shifts. Shadows flee before the light of those who truly cherish the princess. Aizen's eyes burn with eternal devotion. He silently vows to shield her from any future agony. The crown's future rests on a razor's edge, yet the warmth of their bond blazes bright. He's been obsessively hunting for a cure within forbidden texts to save Tion from his fate. Ancient scriptures tell of legendary light spirits capable of shattering any curse. Long ago, dark spirits shared a single origin, forming ancient pacts with the Miranel and Vlad bloodlines. These families were meant to balance each other until the dark spirit's power surged out of control. This disrupted a 1,000-year harmony, leaving new Miranel heirs completely unable to summon their spirits. The only hope lies in the Light Spirit Stone, an artifact overflowing with the power to restore balance. Tragically, that stone vanished centuries ago during a bloody royal succession. Reflecting on this, the Crown Prince sighs deeply. Knowing Doro's heart belongs to Tion, he's determined to help. To save the boy, the worried prince personally escorts Tion to the little princess's private chambers. They enter to find two strangers, likely the commoner brothers Doro brought home from the villa. A flash of melancholy hits the prince. He should be happy, yet a shadow looms over him. Doro is more vibrant than ever, but he feels her drifting further and further away from him. He masks his pain with a dazzling smile, greeting everyone with his signature royal warmth. Doro is stunned by his visit, while the reserve brothers look absolutely shook. They stare at the kind youth, realizing this nice guy is actually the high and mighty crown prince. They're too stunned to speak. Doro just smirks, seeing her brother is still as soft-hearted as ever. 3 years fly by. The little princess has blossomed into a legendary beauty, radiating pure grace. She's shed her old self, becoming a resilient rose, blooming fiercely among deadly thorns. These past 3 years have transformed her into a far more powerful and refined version of herself. Despite her countless charities, palace life remains a golden cage. Thankfully, her villa squad never left her side, helping her survive the suffocating pressure of the court. But one afternoon, Clara collapses in tears. Her elderly father has suddenly passed away. As a grieving daughter, Clara must handle the funeral, and Doro grants her leave instantly. Doro wants to send a tribute, but the staff warns that it defies royal etiquette. Apparently, her favor is reserved for noble sycophants, as every royal gesture carries massive political weight. Rage boils in Doro's heart. She's sick of their heartless rules. If proper etiquette means turning her back on a grieving friend, she'll have none of it. She decides to shatter those chains herself, giving a direct, unshakable command. She sends the wreaths to Clara and publicly vows to attend the lowly commoner's funeral herself. To Doro, her friend's heart is worth more than any royal protocol. She won't miss it. The day of the funeral arrives, and Doro appears at Clara's home draped in mourning black. The noisy crowds have faded, leaving only quiet sobs in the modest hall. Seeing the simple setup, a wave of regret hits Doro. Clara has been her shadow for 6 whole years yet. Doro realized she knew nothing about Clara's real life, her family, or her hidden scars. Without this funeral, she never would have known Clara was the sole provider for an aging father. She feels unworthy of such loyalty, but as they talk, the princess uncovers an even darker truth. Clara's life is a nightmare. Her brother is paralyzed and unable to even stand. With his condition, finding work is impossible. The Empire treats people like him as useless burdens. Doro's blood boils. She vows to protect them, planning a revolutionary proposal for the disabled. It's time her cold, autocratic father faced the truth about his failing leadership over the years. He's so worried that his magicless daughter will ruin the Miranel glory. But the real rot is the corrupt nobility, insane taxes, and the inescapable cycle of poverty. She's done being passive. She'll use her influence to spark happiness for the common folk. It turns out her villainous past was a massive misunderstanding. This kind, radiant princess was never the bloodthirsty tyrant of legend. In her previous life, Doro had actually submitted the same proposal to help the disabled, but before it could even be signed, the greedy ministers revolted, a princess fighting for peasants. In their world, she was a total outcast. Even the emperor lashed out without a shred of mercy. The princess still remembers his icy glare, treating her like absolute trash. Her proposal to support the disabled and the weak was mocked as a useless waste of breath. To him, if it didn't serve the crown, it didn't exist. He despised the commoners, the poor, and especially his magicless daughter. She loathed this rotting regime. And the father who crushed her spirit. Driven by madness, the young princess brought the empire's glory to a bloody end. By then, her noble heart had turned to ash. Now living a second life, her desire to save the people still burned bright. She knew her father's icy heart, yet she chose to fight one more time. For Claire's brother and the thousands suffering in silence, Dora took a deep steeled breath. Suddenly, the crown prince materialized behind her like a shadow from a dream. He playfully snatched her messy draft away. Dora pouted instantly, trying to reclaim her work. In 3 short years, her brother had transformed into a striking, elegant young man, a true prince straight out of a legend. Yet with her, he remained the same doting, clumsy brother. He showered her plan with praise, but Dora stayed quiet, unable to meet his eyes. Knowing their father would likely tear it to shreds, her hard work felt like a worthless scrap of paper. But then the prince flashed a smile and offered his help. His aid came with a price. Dora looked at him with suspicion until he revealed his demand. He wanted a hug. The request sent a rush of crimson to her cheeks. Even as kids, he was never this clingy. She tried to act tough, but then she saw his puppy dog eyes looking completely abandoned. Dora's heart softened in an instant. She realized they had never truly shared a real embrace. The trauma of her past life and the coldness of this one had kept her distant. She feared repeating history, forgetting how siblings were even supposed to act. Guilt washed over her like a tide. She wasn't ready to open up just yet. Meanwhile, the prince felt confident that he could force their father to accept the protection plan. Failure wasn't an option. The mere thought of making her happy made his heart soar with joy. But as he walked, he passed a faded, yellowed portrait of their late mother. He stopped, dazed. It had been an eternity since he'd truly looked at her face. His memories were frozen at that funeral 16 years ago, the same day Dora was born. That tiny, soft baby girl had filled the void in his shattered world, bringing color back to his bleak life. From that first meeting, he swore to be her shield. No matter the request, he would move mountains for her. She deserved the entire world, and he would be her eternal guardian knight. Soon after he entered the Emperor's study, he thought it would be a simple conversation, a quick favor for his sister. But the moment he mentioned aiding the disabled who had lost everything, the Emperor hurled the papers aside like filth. He demanded to know if Dora had bewitched him. In that moment, the prince didn't recognize the man standing before him. His powerful father seemed like a total stranger, blinded by rage toward his own daughter. The prince fought back with logic, refusing to back down. Helping the weak wasn't a waste of time, but the Emperor just sneered and told his son to shut up. To the crown, the only thing that mattered was the fading power of the elves. He'd rather waste the treasury on corrupt nobles who flattered the throne. He called his own daughter a defective toy for lacking elven magic, claiming she was lucky to even be alive. With a dismissive wave, he ended the talk. The prince walked out, his body trembling with a cold, terrifying realization. He witnessed his father's cold gaze toward her, realizing he'd failed the mission the little princess entrusted to him. Reporting back with a racing heart, the prince found his sister far more composed than he had ever anticipated. She clearly saw through the Emperor's toxic nature, prompting the crown prince to make a sudden life-changing decision. He would secretly champion her every whim, vowing to support her desires regardless of the cost to himself. He'd shoulder any fallout. Finally, the little princess confessed a dark secret she'd carried through 2 entire lifetimes. Jealousy over the love showered upon him consumed her, causing her to spitefully ignore his unwavering brotherly devotion. She loathed his kindness. Since he didn't despise her, she felt she could truly embrace her role as the villain. Trying to erase memories of that blood-soaked night, his current warmth only served to highlight her own internal shadows. Clinging desperately to his royal robes, the princess broke down, screaming that she absolutely hated him with all her heart. She wanted to destroy him, claiming a monster like her deserved zero affection, pleading for him to finally stop his mercy. Isolate me, hurt me, just like father. Only then would the suffocating guilt finally begin to ebb away. Dreading his reaction, she looked away only to hear his unexpected gentle laughter echoing softly in the quiet room. Awkwardly scratching his head, the prince insisted there was absolutely no reason for her to feel sorry for anything. Small mistakes didn't matter. If anyone had failed, it was him for not being the protector she truly deserved. His innocence cut deep. He had no clue that in another life she was the one who murdered their family. He didn't know she'd pierced his heart before. Yet, despite his ignorance, his unconditional forgiveness moved her to tears. Staring at him in a daze, the princess was suddenly pulled into a warm, protective embrace that felt like home. As if handling fragile glass, he held her close, whispering the words she needed most. "It's all okay now. You've worked so hard, Dora." That was the breaking point. She buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. Though the bloody tragedy of their past remained forgotten by everyone else, the heavy weight of those sins still remained. She felt like she was drowning in filth, constantly battling a wave of hopeless, soul-crushing remorse every single day. But today, someone finally validated her existence. It felt as if a massive boulder was lifted from her chest. She was finally liberated from those haunting, unbearable memories that had plagued her soul. Wiping her eyes in embarrassment, the princess listened as her brother began teasing her with his usual light-hearted jokes. She stubbornly denied crying. From that day, the girl finally began making peace with her dark, troubled past. Her relationship with her brother blossomed, growing warmer with every small daily interaction they shared from then on. A year flew by in a flash, and the assistance center they had envisioned was finally a reality. Standing before the completed building, the princess felt a deep sense of pride at the fruits of her labor. Her heart overflowed with respect for the crown prince. Though her scheme hit a wall, her brother's storytelling tactics saved the day. He compiled a book of marginalized voices specially crafted to enchant high society nobles at their lavish banquets. Thanks to a wave of public sympathy, donations flooded her account, and this was only the beginning of her rise. Turns out iron-fisted tyrants weren't destined for the throne. Meanwhile, Dora was finally starting to glow with genuine happiness. Leon, who harbored a secret crush, couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. He decided to invite the princess to his hometown. He was dying to confess his feelings. Meanwhile, the little princess received an official invitation from the prestigious Vlad family. It was Theon who asked her to visit. She bit her lip, hesitating, desperate to avoid any deeper connection with him. Theon belonged to Julia, so she tried to keep a just friend's distance. But suddenly he reached out his hand. His intense, passionate gaze left her feeling completely exposed. Deep down, she was still greedy for this man's affection. After loving him through 2 lifetimes, those cold words of rejection remained locked away. In her previous life, the princess had visited Theon's rain-drenched homeland once before, a place where the storm clouds never seemed to part. Back then, they were newlyweds, but Julia's shadow kept Theon trapped in a cycle of endless melancholy. She hoped returning home would lift his spirits, but she was dead wrong. Every effort she made was utterly ignored. She was never reflected in Theon's eyes, yet she still accepted his request. However, destiny had a surprise waiting. Julia was among the travelers. She clung to Theon's side, fussing over the supplies for their journey together. The two were locked in their own world, gossiping about school, leaving absolutely no room for anyone else to join. At that moment, she had to face the bitter truth: Julia and Theon were a match made in heaven. She felt like a total clown, using her pathetic royal authority to block a love that was meant to be. She deserved her tragic end in that past life. This was the karma a villainous supporting character had to endure. As the princess drowned in her dark memories, Theon sensed her shift in mood and stepped forward. With perfect manners, he offered his hand and asked her to go fishing. For a heartbeat, the world stopped spinning. In her daze, the princess even forgot to reject her third-wheel brother, who was desperate to ruin the moment. The cunning Julia quickly shut him up, allowing Theon to lead the princess to the tranquil lakeshore alone. They began to fish in a heavy silence. After a long wait, it was finally Theon who broke the tension. There was so much he wanted to tell little Doro. He was ready to pour his heart out, but then, suddenly her fishing line snapped taut. Realizing a massive fish had taken the bait, the panicked girl lost control. She instinctively reached for his help, and just like that, the physical distance between them vanished instantly. As they fought to pull the rod, Doro stumbled, falling straight into Theon's protective embrace. In that heartbeat, the ultimate cliché occurred. As he looked down, their lips met in a fleeting accidental graze. Like a dragonfly skimming the water, that soft touch paralyzed them both. For a second, time itself stood still. Her heart hammered against her ribs like thunder, while Theon's entire face turned a deep, burning crimson. His confession hung dangerously on the edge of his lips, but then a sudden scream shattered the romantic atmosphere. It was Stephen Knight standing right there. This was a disaster. There was no way to explain this awkward situation. Flustered, the girl scrambled to her feet, rambling about anything else to hide her exploding nervousness. And just like that, Theon's first attempt to confess failed miserably. Dejected, he led her back to the shore. A cool breeze brushed her lips, echoing the ghost of that brief, accidental kiss from moments ago. It felt like her heart might actually burst, yet Theon looked perfectly composed as if nothing had happened. She felt like a fool for overthinking it, but maybe that was for the best. At least Theon was still alive. She couldn't let her selfish greed grow again after the tragedy of her past. A villain like her didn't deserve a happy ending. With a heavy heart, she pulled out a personal handkerchief. It was a treasure she once cherished, but now she had to return it. Tears threatened to spill over. Forcing a smile, she told herself to be grateful. They had held hands and shared a quiet moment fishing. They even shared a kiss, something she never dared to dream of in her old life. That had to be enough. She was finally prepared to walk away, realizing she could survive without him. The princess finally learned to let go. She would use her own sacrifice to end this cycle of tragedy. And so, night fell upon the kingdom. She leaned against the balcony railing, letting the cool night air brush against her skin. The summer sky was breathtakingly clear, making her heart ache for Aizen, who was still isolated in that distant palace. She couldn't help but wonder, how was he holding up? A man that flawless was destined to become the shining star of the high society elite. Time blurred until the little princess finally celebrated her 18th birthday. Meanwhile, the crown prince and Tion, crushed their Royal Academy exams with flying colors. Clutching a bouquet, she went to congratulate her brother on his graduation. But she was hit with news she absolutely dreaded. The annual graduation ball was looming on the horizon. This was the ultimate battlefield for noble heirs, the most prestigious social event of the entire year. Showing up without a partner meant instant social suicide and becoming a national laughingstock. In her past life, she was that exact unwanted shadow. The crown prince gently asked his sister if she had any potential candidates in mind. Panicked, the little princess quickly avoided his gaze. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted Tion, but seeing the gorgeous Julia glued to his side made her feel pathetic. Who would ever want to dance with a ghost princess who had zero presence? A loser who couldn't even summon a single elf. The nobles whispered she was just a useless toy, fit only to be a filthy mistress. As their mockery echoed around her, Tion suddenly stepped into her view. For a girl starved for affection, his protection felt like a lifeline. She would fly straight into the furnace, like a moth to a flame, rather than let go. If only she knew it was respect, not love, the tragedy of her past life might never have happened. Shaking off those haunting memories, she turned to leave. But then, a sudden arrogant voice demanded everyone's attention. The little princess looked up, locking eyes with the haughty Prince Alka. He asked her to be his partner, but his tone was dripping with pure contempt, overflowing with condescension. Just as she prepared to snap back in anger, a slender hand rested firmly on her shoulder. That familiar voice sent a shock through her. Isin was back. With a confident smirk, he spoke. The princess's date was decided a long time ago. Then, before the stunned crowd, he pressed a deep, passionate kiss onto the little princess's forehead. 6 years of agonizing longing exploded into that one single touch. Still not satisfied, Isin gently kissed the back of her hand with pure devotion. In that second, her cheeks flushed a deep, ripened crimson, but the bold young man wasn't finished yet. He leaned in close, his deep voice vibrating against her ear as he whispered that he had finally returned to fulfill the promise he made 6 years ago. It turns out Prince Alka's invitation was a trap designed to humiliate the girl who had once defeated him. The man had been nursing a petty grudge and planned to ditch her mid-dance to destroy her reputation. He wanted to make her a public disgrace on the biggest night of her life, but unexpectedly, Isin's dramatic arrival flipped the script entirely. The newcomer stood like a shield in front of the little princess and instantly shut down Prince Alka's invitation. Watching his scheme crumble, Nereus exploded into a foul-mouthed rage. He couldn't believe a low-born brat dared to steal his partner. He intended for Doro to be the victim, but now it seemed like he was the one looking like a desperate clown with unrequited love. In a fit of fury, Nereus slapped Isin across the face, leaving a brutal dark bruise blooming at the corner of the young man's mouth. Luckily, the crown prince intervened before things got bloody while Isin stood in the corner, his fists white-knuckled with rage. It wasn't the time for payback yet, or he would have absolutely ended the man who dared to insult Doro. On the other side, Alka stormed off in a huff. The little princess quickly rushed Isin to the infirmary. The school nurse was nowhere to be found, leaving the two of them standing in heavy silence. 6 years of separation had vanished, transforming naive children into striking adults. Now, Isin was a top-tier gentleman pursued by everyone while she felt like the same forgotten, fallen princess from years ago. She was terrified he'd noticed the wild, desperate ambitions hidden in her heart. He shouldn't waste a second of his time on someone like me, she thought to herself. But when she looked up and met his intense, passionate gaze, it was impossible not to melt under such tenderness. But the girl's resolve was crystal clear as she replayed her past life and Isin's deceptive, honeyed words. His flattery was pure arsenic, a silver tongue used to bewitch her former self and trigger her downward spiral. In her previous arrogance, she'd walked straight into ruin. This time, the princess wouldn't fall for his lies again. She coldly recoiled, pulling her hand from his grasp and ending their awkward reunion right then and there. By the next morning, the scandalous rumor that Isin was the princess's dance partner spread like wildfire through the palace. Word of their pairing reached every corner of the imperial court before the sun had even fully risen. Summoned by the emperor, she reluctantly headed to the throne room, bracing herself for a harsh interrogation and reprimand. Steeling her heart, the little princess prepared to face the full force of her father's impending royal storm. Surprisingly, he presented a fresh vintage of red wine instead. The gold-stamped labels bore a very specific name. It was Doro, a wine crafted in her honor. She stared in disbelief at her father's weathered, aging face. She assumed he'd forgotten his old promise. 100,000 bottles, her massive, long-awaited coming-of-age gift. Yet her expression remained cold. The deep scars her father inflicted had already become a permanent emotional stain. This belated display of affection felt hollow, only making her want to distance herself from him even more. She accepted the wine but only took a single bitter sip once she returned to the solitude of her room. She gave the rest to the commoners. Finally, the night of the ball arrived, and her breathtaking transformation stunned everyone. The moment she stepped out, audible gasps of pure awe echoed through the grand gold-trimmed ballroom. Though the snobbish guests usually looked down on her, they couldn't deny her radiant, unrivaled presence that night. Under the heavy gaze of the elite, she approached the front, where a formally dressed Aizen was already waiting. He played the perfect gentleman, extending his hand and whispering soft reassurances to soothe her visible nerves. But how could she stay calm? In her past life, this very ball had been her ultimate soul-crushing humiliation. Back then, she had no partner and stood alone like a pathetic, ridiculed clown for all to see. To make matters worse, the lights had failed during her entrance, plunging her into an endless, mocking darkness. Even after the glow returned, the piercing, judgmental glares were unbearable. She nervously bit her lip at the memory. Lost in her trauma, she didn't notice Aizen leaning in. He moved silently, his lips hovering near her ear. To the crowd, it looked like an intimate kiss. This bold move instantly shattered her spiraling anxiety and unease. Watching from the shadows, Teo clenched his fists in a jealous rage, frustrated that he lacked the authority to intervene. Amidst a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, the guests finally stood still as the Emperor made his grand entrance. The brilliant chandeliers suddenly dimmed. Collective gasps filled the air as tiny sparks of starlight erupted from his hands. This was the legendary elf light, a divine gift left to Miranel by the gods themselves. Even the princess couldn't hide her yearning as she watched the celestial glow dance before her eyes. Her father called it the ultimate symbol of royal legitimacy, but some destinies simply cannot be rewritten by force. She had long ago accepted her own perceived inadequacies, resigning herself to a life without that ancient power. While she was lost in thought, the lights flashed back on. She quickly masked her sadness with a graceful smile. Accepting Aizen's invitation, she stepped forward. Their synchronized, elegant movements immediately captivated every single person in the room. They dominated the dance floor with such fluidity that the entire gala seemed to revolve around them. Before the first song even ended, they had become the undisputed main event of the royal evening. Seeing this, Neri's envy reached a breaking point. She maliciously scuffed the rug, hoping to cause a public disaster. She sneered, waiting for Aizen to trip and burn. However, the sharp-eyed youth had already spotted her pathetic sabotage. With a flawless pivot, he guided the princess to safety, making the recovery look like a choreographed masterpiece. Their effortless grace drew massive admiration. Impressed, the princess whispered, "Is there anything you aren't good at?" He flashed a teasing smirk and leaned in close, deliberately playing the part of the charming, heart-stealing lead. At that proximity, the princess felt her pulse skyrocket. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her mind went completely blank, nearly causing her to stumble and forget the rhythm of the dance. Suddenly, Aizen's tone turned dead serious. "Do you want to summon the light elf?" he asked. She froze for half a second before nodding with fierce determination. But just as she agreed, suddenly, the ballroom plunged into total darkness. This was the exact nightmare from her past life. The little princess's pupils shrank in sheer terror. But a heartbeat later, a celestial radiance exploded around her. Her presence became even more blinding than at the opening ceremony. Under everyone's stunned gaze, the tiny princess summoned a legendary light elf. A brilliant, pure white aura consumed the entire hall instantly. No one dared to doubt her royal blood now. The guests stood frozen, speechless before this divine miracle. The melodic music resumed. She danced with ethereal grace within that shimmering glow. But as the starlight began to fade, a shadow of despair crept onto her face. She stared at Aizen, completely dazed. Then she fled the scene like a hunted fugitive. By tomorrow, news of her summoning power would go viral. But a lie is still a lie. She didn't know Aizen's methods, but she knew this power wasn't hers. She felt like a total clown, still clinging to fantasies about her own useless self. It was pathetic to think she'd actually created a miracle. This was all just Aizen's cold, calculated move. Nothing hurts more than winning like a fraud. This fake glory would only trigger an endless cycle of misery. Right then, Aizen rushed to her side, looking deeply worried for the little princess. She violently shoved his hand away. Undeterred, the devoted young man knelt and presented her with a light elf stone. It was the legendary artifact that had been missing for over 100 years. He pressed it into her trembling hands. The girl frowned in confusion, only to hear the young man whisper that this was his past life regret, a gift he failed to give then. Her eyes widened. She asked if he had also regressed like her, but he just laughed, shaking his head gently. He told her that rebirth wasn't quite right. He had simply traveled back to the time where she belonged. In that moment, all her memories synced up. She recalled every tiny detail she'd purposefully ignored. She had heard his subtle confessions more than once, his gentle, constant care by her sickbed. From her first death to this second chance, his fingerprints were everywhere, guiding her path. The girl finally grasped Aizen's true feelings. Since their very first meeting, this cunning young man had been hopelessly obsessed with her. His manipulations were just misunderstandings. He even traded his throne just to be with her. Finally, the little princess saw the truth buried in her own heart. Then the young man revealed a secret. She never knew he refused the crown after her past death. Instead, he made a deal with the Elf King to return to his tragic childhood. He knew exactly the hell he'd face upon returning. Yet he chose to regress without hesitation. Dora was his entire world. She was his only reason to exist. In a world without her love, he wouldn't stay a second. Isen was already head over heels for Dora, while others mocked the princess for her lack of magic. Only Isen saw her hidden spark. To him, she was a thorny rose using fake arrogance to mask her deep insecurities. She was already the perfect ruler in his eyes, powers or not. Even without the elves, she was magnificent. But the world shunned her for one tiny flaw. Isen only wanted to protect her. Both struggling in the mud, they shared the same desperate ambitions. They were destined to be the most compatible partners. But love doesn't care who arrives first. At that time, Dora was already smitten with the useless Tion. So Isen chose to serve her in silence. He watched them marry and travel, lurking in the shadows, until he unearthed a devastating secret. A secret that would surely shatter Dora's heart. He cornered Tion using a blade to force him away. Isen's eyes blazed with pure fury. He looked down, exposing Tion's disgusting true face. Tion never cared about her. That grand wedding was just a scheme to steal Marinai's ancient power. He needed to suppress the dark elf corruption. His shortcut was becoming the princess's husband. Tion once thought about confessing, but seeing her pure, hopeful eyes, he choked on the truth. His cowardice created this mess. Now he has no way to pay back his debt to her. Right then, Isen flashed a bone-chilling smile. He told Tion that his judgment day was coming fast. By now, Dora had already finished her massacre in the palace. No one was left to save him. The absolute might of the Dark Elves. He dropped those chilling words and walked away without a single glance back. He moved to greet his Empress, who returned home drenched in the blood of her enemies. Since that fateful day, the shocking news that the tiny princess had slaughtered the crown prince spread like wildfire. Marinai's entire government spiraled into a blood-stained nightmare. Despite reigning as Victoria, Dora received zero love from her subjects. The greedy nobles stood in open defiance of the girl's authority, desperately demanding she summon the Light Elf to prove her royal bloodline. Under their cold glares, the young princess was slowly withering away. Without that divine symbol, her legitimacy was dead. Witnessing Dora drown in her own self-doubt tore Ise's heart to pieces. His princess shouldn't feel this weak or inferior. To fix everything, the devoted young man turned his gaze toward the legendary Light Elf stone. It was currently the only trump card left to flip the script. But the cost of seizing that miracle was devastating. It required the total sacrifice of